What's up, guys? We got another Rep Files for you. And we got JMG, Jeff from JMG Reptiles here. He's only outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And of course, we have our co-host Dave from RL Exotics. And we're just going to start talking. Jeff has a lot of stuff going on, so let's get into it.
You need me to start out, Junior? Or you want to just roll into something?
Oh, I could say, yeah. We said a lot of stuff going on. I mean, I'm moving into a new place currently, and behind me, I got a bunch of my baby hognose snakes, and I know Dave's just kind of recently moved into a newer facility as well, and it's been kind of luckily I got a place that's only about 5-10 minutes from my old place where I still have a lot of my animals, so it's pretty easy to transport everything back and forth. It's actually been pretty difficult, but luckily just being close, that's actually alleviated a lot of the stress because I can just run back and forth constantly.
Gotcha. And when did you make the move?
Well, it wasn't totally ready to move in when I got my place, which was like in the late fall, but I started transitioning and moving stuff over probably around December, January.
All right. And has anybody filmed in here yet?
No, nobody has.
So this is us. This is our first time. We're in. This is good. We're the first time guys.
It's the debut.
That's right.
Yeah. That's not entirely done, but it's getting there. The only room that hasn't been finished is like my gecko room. That room's kind of still just painted, and the floors need to be done, and one other thing needs to be installed, and that's pretty much it. So it's pretty close.
That's awesome. It's
cool.
so fun. I think it's every reptile person's dream to always move up and get things better and better. So it's exciting when we see other people doing it. It's great. Almost living vicariously through you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's kind of cool. It seems like a lot of people I noticed lately, like my friend John, who also breeds hognose snakes, he built a facility and it's like crisp and clean, brand new. And he's just started progressively moving to that spot also. And then I know Dave recently got a new place, and I've seen a few pictures of that. So it's it's real fun moving everything and actually having a lot more ample space and expand, just space to expand and to, just put everything where it needs to go.
Gotcha.
That's where we're at right now. We hopefully this year we'll be able to move into a dedicated facility, but we're like busting at the seams here, trying to cram stuff in corners. So
that's how it needs to go right before you're, ready to move up. It's kind of like never goes exactly as planned, but once you get the, space or wherever you're moving into.
Mm-hmm.
So what I guess I'd like to know, what your history is in the hobby, like how you got in and, what you've gone through and how you got to where you are today.
And how long you've been doing it?
Well, I think it's kind of like a lot of people. They kind of had interest from the time they were a kid and, being exposed to either reptiles and amphibians, which I was because my dad bred redfoot tortoises and a lot of frogs. He bred like Argentine horn frogs, tomato frogs, a few other species. And then he also had some leopard geckos and fat-tailed geckos. And I kind of remember a lot of that stuff from the time I was 4 or 5 years old, real vaguely. And he actually didn't keep or breed any snakes. And when I see my first snake was in our yard, I was probably 5, with a garter snake, and I was pretty enthralled with that. And I think it was because I had so much exposure and wasn't really exposed to snakes, so it wasn't really that big of an interest of my dad's at the time. And so when I seen a snake, I kind of really, grasped onto those as far as having an interest in them. And, I had an old Audubon that my dad had. So it was all illustrations of North American species. He has North American species of reptiles and amphibians. And there's an illustration of an eastern milk snake. And that's actually first snake I kind of fell in love with, which was kind of funny because they live in Ohio. They have pretty large snakes. And so my first pet was when I was 7, was an eastern milk snake. And, then it kind of progressed from there. And actually at that time, my dad was phasing out of breeding stuff. And he had, other interests, and we were also moving houses too and everything. And the only thing he kept was his redfoot tortoise collection. And then I started wanting to get more snakes, and I'd always be asking him to take me to reptile shows and stuff, which was sometimes a drag for him because it's now I got to wake up, on the weekends. And, I wanted to go to every reptile show. And then I seen my first hognose snake when I was 8. and it was like a wild caught female in just this big plastic container. I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, what kind of snake's that? And my dad's like, oh, that's a hognose snake. I've seen those before and everything. And then from then on, I just really wanted to get into hognose, and I started wanting to breed them, and so I was getting more and more. And at the time, my dad was kind of like, oh, I don't want you getting too much stuff because I might have to help, and I don't want to get involved at all.
Yeah.
And then by the time I was like 12, I was wanting to breed leopard geckos, and then he kind of seen at that point, I wasn't stopping. My interest was only expanding, and he was getting reinterested in it through the, my interest and passion. And he's like, well, I used to breed these, and he's like, and he's seeing me like kind of barter with people and everything, and trying to spend like $50, $60 on a leopard gecko, and a lot of them having like, like a Murphy patternless that was like $100. And they're like, no, I'm not going to sell this to you for $50 or $60. And then my dad's like, you want me to just, buy some? And he goes, we could start breeding them together. And then, as soon as he got involved with the leopard geckos and everything, we kind of just went full bore. And then he just caught his passion for that. It seemed like pretty much instantaneously.
And how old were you at that point?
When we started getting enrolled in the leopard geckos, I was like 12, 13. And by the time I was 15, we were like pretty much had the whole basement converted to a bunch of built melamine racks, and I was still breeding some hognose. I had some Kenyan sambos and stuff, and maybe had a few other species, but then we had like leopard and fat-tailed geckos.
That's cool, man.
It's awesome. Dave, I know you had a couple questions. You're definitely a little more quiet than normal.
Well, I'm waiting for my time. I'm not going to try to bug you here, but well, honestly, one of my favorite things you always had was the Arctic project, and that was something that you said you found when you were how old?
It wasn't really. It wasn't really. At the time, I didn't know. I knew it was something different, and that's kind of how I started. Like, because I didn't have a lot of money then when I was buying hognose snakes at all. Especially when I was in my mid-teens, I would save up like every dime I made in a year, any of money I got from Christmas or just because I'd work all summer for people, and I'd save up, and I'd usually I'd go to Daytona and other shows, and I'd buy hognose snakes. And I looked for anything that was odd. And when I got the first Arctic, I think I was young. I was probably a little under the age of 15, and at the time I didn't know that was the actual even animal that started the project until I bred it into my lemon ghost project, which was just kind of like a high bright, like yellow colored hognose that had a predominantly yellow stomach. It kind of had like a hypo-ish look. And I picked that one out at a show and bred that into my lemon ghost. And I had some different looking babies. There's a few that kind of had some highlights to them and everything. And it wasn't until I kind of outcrossed them from lemon ghost, you seen more of that, what a typical, Arctic would look like, that kind of look. And so it's been a long time. I mean, when I picked up the first Arctic, it was probably around like 17 years ago.
Wow.
So these guys don't know a whole lot about hognose. So I told you beforehand, you got to have some hognose in your hand. You want to grab some super Arctic stuff while you're chatting?
Yeah. I'll grab.
And if you want to grab a single gene form to kind of show it, because again, when you see the single gene form compared to the super form, it's absolutely mind blowing what that animal does. Yeah,
the single gene form's going to be kind of hard to show up on camera. As far as the key characteristics, and maybe now I might have some pretty cool. I do. I definitely have some pretty cool Arctics. Let me grab one.
Sure. Well, kind of wandering. That's kind of entertaining. Maybe we'll just have a wander.
Watch me look around and see which one's a good one. I mean, I got some. See, a lot of them are combinations, and this one's really cool. I'll bring this one over, even though it's a combo. It's an Arctic lavender.
Make sure to bring this a super Arctic with you by itself, so you can see the black and the white. If you have one,
because it will be. I don't want to have too many snakes in my hand.
Well, let's start with like 5 or 6. Don't be a little wussy about it.
Yeah, this would be great.
I don't want that many.
Just put some in your pockets and.
Yeah, those look like big pockets you got there. I just pop them in there.
Yeah. You could Pee Wee Herman it,
Oh yeah, you could be a Pee Wee Herman.
That guy. Yeah, like Dave told today, it was actually a couple of days ago. He goes, "Yeah, you can put on like a goofy hat and stuff." And so, like, I was like, "Yeah, I'll get my one metallic hat." And I do not have it. So Dave's the only one that's dressed crazy.
That's fine. I mean, people are used to it.
This is an Arctic here. The one that's kind of more normal colored. But you could actually, this is kind of a bad example of an Arctic. To me, I can definitely tell it's really easily when I'm camera's going to be kind of tough. But this one has the more frosted, like light colored background.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
They have like a grayish background. Their saddles are typically greenish. If you look real closely, the one characteristic of Arctics is like a lot of black concentration around the saddles. And I'm not sure if you can see that.
Yeah, I don't think we're getting any of that, actually. I think your camera's horrible now that we're really looking at your animals.
But you can send the B-roll, and I'll put in the B-roll.
Yeah, there's a Super Arctic here. I don't know how well you can see that.
It's not even in the camera.
I'm trying to see because I can't really see. Now I can kind of see.
Hey, you should probably take like your shirt and rub your camera a little bit. It looks like you got like a foggy spot on there, man. Like maybe you left a little I don't know, what do they call it? Hand lotion on there, maybe?
Yeah, sure.
That could be what they call it.
Hold on.
With the
Oh, yeah,
runner?
well, I hope.
It should be a pretty good camera. I mean, his laptop's fairly new.
I'll be honest. I think it looks a lot better now. I think you were just carrying your computer around with your thumb over the camera.
I
Yeah,
don't think it was. I think it looks the same. Here, I'll grab more. I'll grab some.
I think it looks more sharp.
Yeah, I think it looks a lot more sharp. Yeah, considerably better.
Okay.
Yeah, you even look high definition. You look like high definition far away now, man. We weren't getting the full effect.
That's a Super Arctic lavender right there. So it has a combination of the recessive lavender trait and the incomplete dominant super form Super Arctic, right? Combination.
That's a good looking animal. If you throw that to full screen, does it cut off the audio?
No.
Like our audio to talk?
Yeah, that might be better that way. Because I think you need to be a little further from the camera when you do this. Because I think when you get too close, it's not focusing right.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so now let's start the whole process over again. Go get the rest of those animals. Now it actually looks good. Get yeah, I'm gonna be really needy here. Get a Super Arctic with more high whites on it. I don't want gray on it.
That one I grabbed was kind of like that's actually a het lavender, and that one's like bizarre looking. That's like not even really a typical looking Super Arctic, actually. Probably grab one from this rack because I got. Trying to find one that shed out already. This one just shed. This is a dirty one. That one's pretty cool, but it's dirty.
Yeah, that's not what I wanted. I want clean crisp.
You want a really nice black and white one.
Yeah, I want that black and white. If you got to run to the other room, we can get by without you. Okay, big screen this thing. Better be worth it.
All right, hang on 1 second.
Okay, I think that's a better one. Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah,
That's nice.
And you want to show the belly off of that guy?
Yeah, it's like solid black. Although this one has some checkerboarding. Most Super Arctics have like near jet black belly. This one's got a little checkerboarding.
that's awesome.
That's cool.
No. But yeah. So the cool thing about Junior's new place is his old place was about the size of this one room right here.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if it's that small.
Oh, it was freaking small, man.
The uniformity of that pattern is awesome.
Yeah, it kind of like it changes it quite a bit. It does a lot of stuff. This gene really alters a lot. For one, they have solid black eyes. So if you look real close, you'll see
yeah.
you can't distinguish the iris from the pupil. It increases the black wherever black is on Western hognose, like on their saddles. It's dramatically increased. Pretty much knocks out all the background pigment and leaves it pretty much white. But there's still a lot of hues left behind. And you have if you look underneath their throat, you'll see that they have like translucent scales as well.
Okay.
Wow.
By the end of this one, we'll be working with hognose again.
Yeah, I feel like that's true.
Nice.
Man, those are cool animals, dude.
So one more Super Arctic, and then I want you to sit back down. You got like a Bub's Daddy laying around?
I do. I got this one here, and this one's probably a little more interesting
What's with
looking.
Bub's Daddy?
Oh, you'll see. It's nothing too crazy. It's just a cool name for a simple combination.
Okay.
There's a super Arctic albino anaconda.
Oh, that's cool. I love that. A bubblegum pink.
Yep. And that's where the name comes from. Bub's daddy's like an old school type of bubblegum that would come in like big yardsticks.
Okay. Right on. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, that's pretty cool one. Okay. Oh, so the cool thing too that I find with, I like talking about the mutations and where they came from. So, you stumbling across that animal of the show is awesome. And I feel like there's been a few other hognose morphs, like with Dan Eby with the Sable Project, kind of stumbling across that. I don't remember the breeder's name, but we went to go eat that lavender albino that one time.
David Herp, yeah, he's the originator of lavender hognose. Yeah, you got that was a really interesting one because it was so lucky and so good that he did get the 2 hognose when he did get them. You got him at a reptile show, and essentially from the story, I mean, I can't speak for him, but Dave was telling me. I remember the gist of this. I know he bought 2 at a reptile show from a person, and it sounded like the person he got them from, I'm positive they did not breed hognose, and that they had multiple babies that were produced from wild-caught hognose and from Texas, West Texas locale. And he had bred corn snakes at the time. He wanted to get back into hognose, and he bought a pair of normals and bred them together, and he produced lavender, a couple lavender. Or I think always only one lavender out of the first clutch, and that's how that whole project started. So,
wow.
And
That's
we'll get a
lucky,
picture of that up when you're talking. And then the same thing with the Sable, or not the same thing, but that was a couple animals, wild caught animals that were normal.
Wild-caught Montana locale. Hognose and bred together and produced the Sable. I was just talking to Dan about that. I think about a week ago, about how he came across those and the whole story again. Yep, so there's 2 animals from the same area, around the same area where he's with Herp, and kept them and bred them together.
The leucistic hognose, wasn't there a story behind that?
Oh yeah, that's a big story. I think the guy's name was Brooke, and actually, because I know this one guy from Fish and Wildlife, and I was talking to him about it because it's kind of a crazy story. But yeah, that's the thing I was too, because I'm I've noticed twice in a row. I was from wild-caught species, from Texas and Montana and a few other states. That's okay, but they've cracked down more on laws with keeping and collecting. So yeah, you can't do it from any state Western hognose occur. But those states are still completely fine, and a few others. The one that's been real iffy, or there's been a few that you can't, but Colorado is one. Colorado's laws are really odd, and if you talk to I guess Fish and Wildlife, because I talked to the PAC, it's a organization for herps over there, and they're well, we've addressed it with people in Fish and Wildlife and DNR, and they're yeah, they agree that the laws don't make sense, but they're pretty difficult to change, so they don't really want to change them unless somebody makes it their mission and goes through the whole politics. But you're actually allowed to catch and keep hognose in Colorado as long as you live in Colorado. It's actually you gotta look it up to be 100% sure, but from what I recall, and I do know this is all true, if you live in Colorado, you're allowed to collect and keep them. You can't keep them from a preserve, but if you just go to a state park or find one, you're allowed to keep them. You can keep up to 4 a year. You're not allowed to have more than I think 12 in your possession. That number may be smaller, but you're not allowed to sell or cross state lines with them. So it's kind of basically you're allowed to collect, and have them in your possession, but if you cross the state line, then you're somehow, committing an illegal act. So, and that's what happened in Colorado. But actually his, I think from the sounds of it, what he says, his side of the story is that they were grandfathered in, but they changed the law where they don't have that in effect. But the original ones that he had were before that law passed. And then he started selling them. And I think he had some warning that he wasn't supposed to be selling them. And he continued to do so. And then they hit him with a bunch of, and from what the guy I was talking to that knows all those the details, he basically said that since he was selling a decent amount of them and they surpassed the $500 value because they were leucistics, that it became a felony because it was over $500. And then every state line they crossed, there was an additional felony. And so they just kind of tallied it up to make it sound like an absurd amount of felonies. And I know he got in a lot of trouble. So
that's nuts.
And there were a few other people that got in trouble without naming any names that had to go through the whole court process. And then
one big breeder, and I know he was pretty traumatized from it. And then a couple others though that were pretty big, and they just got theirs confiscated and taken, and then nothing happened to them. So I don't know what prompted them to charge certain people and not others. You know, so they made a pretty big deal about it, and the animals ended up then in like the Kansas City Zoo. I heard the Denver Zoo, then some people actually got them to the Kansas City Zoo, and eventually they got auctioned off and went to an individual, and he started breeding them and reselling them. And at that point, they didn't care that anybody had them, and, you know, have them now in captivity. So even the ones you see now that are available are descendants from that original guy, Brooke, in Colorado, but they were legally, you know, obtained through the zoos that had them, then sold them.
Wow. That's a crazy story.
Yeah, it is. It's it's funny because I remember at the time when it happened, I was like 13, and maybe I was 13 or 14, and I was thinking of a way to try to gather money and buy hets, you know, for like, you know, within like a year or two. I'm like, I'd like to get a pair of hets and get into that project. And good thing I didn't, because they would have knocked on my door when I was like 14 or 15 and probably came and took all of them. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe they would have left me alone because like, hey, this 14-year-old kid, and they probably wouldn't have. They probably would have. They're like, these animals are as legal as hell because they were transported and everything. But then, you know, I hear people from, I get people from Colorado. It happens every now and then, and I always have it in the back of my mind because I'm like, you know what? I was like, the one time I even guessed, I was like, I bet this guy's from Colorado. And they'll start talking to me and asking me questions and everything. And, you know, like, I want to buy this snake. They'll send me money. And then they'll be like, here's my shipping address. And it's Colorado. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not shipping it to you. I was like, I got to send you a refund. And they're, oh, really? How come? And I'm like, well, your state laws, you know, are this, and that. I was like, you can go out. That's the thing about their state laws. The state laws are in place. And it's for, I think, any native species there. And those laws are in place so people don't collect them and keep them. I guess that's the reason they have those laws, because you think they'd want to help the native like Herpetofauna, but they are actually suggesting that you take them from the wild instead of buying one that's been captive born, because
that's nuts, man.
Yeah, because everybody that's trying to buy one from me, which is, you know, it's a completely legal hognose, and the whole process is legal except for the just crossing to Colorado. Even if it's a visual morph, and you know, there's not without a doubt that this snake is legal, they can still consider just that act illegal. But they're like, well, instead of buying a captive born hognose, you can just go out and try to find one and keep one. And actually, I know about 3 people that bought hognose or tried to buy hognose from me that I had to, you know, refund. At least 2 of those people I know actually have wild caught hognose. And I found out about how many you could keep and everything through one person. I remember some guy had some hognose, and I was like, man, all those hognose kind of look like they're just like standard normal wild caught. I was like, they kind of look like Colorado locales, sort of like that area. And I looked at his profile, and then it was like he was in Colorado. And I'm like, and I messaged him directly. I'm like, hey, you're not allowed to own, you know, hognose in Colorado and everything. And he goes, oh, no, yeah, I am. And he goes, these are all wild caught. He goes, it's legal to take them. I'm like, no. And he goes, yeah. And then he sent me the link, and that's how I learned about it.
That's nuts laws, man. Jeez.
Yeah.
No CB. You got to collect from the wild.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no captive born. Well, you're allowed to have captive born if you breed them, and then you hatch them yourself, but then you might be exceeding the legal limit. And I don't know what they want you to do with them at that point. They want you to let them go, which isn't the smartest thing, because if you have other captive born cooler-brids, they could be disease vectors. So you got to be careful there. But that law really needs to be changed. The guy I know with Fish and Wildlife in Illinois, he's actually been doing some pretty cool stuff with efforts and getting out. He's actually designing a permit so people can actually start breeding hognose in Illinois, because they're endangered in Illinois, or critically endangered. There's only a couple little areas that are habitat left, where they exist. So I'm sure the range in Illinois was actually somewhat decent, but it's kind of the furthest eastern extent of where they exist. And but there's still a few areas, fragmented areas, that a couple of them I think are like national parks, but they still exist there and everything. And for a while, you couldn't own Western hognose there, and so he had a permit now where you can, and it's free and it's pretty easy to get. It only takes about 10-15 minutes to fill out, and within a couple of months, you're allowed to own a Western hognose. And there's something that's currently happening. He told me about. I can't remember exactly, but for the time being, I actually have to go back to getting the old permit to vend Western hognose at the Illinois, reptile shows like Tinley. But the new permit he's getting is they're going to actually enable people to start breeding Western hognose. So pretty soon, if you live in Illinois, you'll be able to breed and keep Western hognose on a larger scale and a much easier scale than before.
Nice.
Pretty good.
Yeah, it's cool because he's one of those guys that's, with Fish and Wildlife and everything, and knows the people in the DNR, and he's actually kind of advocating for keeping or making it at least easy, tracking the stuff and making sure people like, pretty obvious, if you buy a Western hognose, it's illegal Western hognose because everybody's just, breeding captive born. There's very few wild caught, and all of the interest is in color mutations and not normals.
Nice. So going back, jumping to another species. So like you said, leopard geckos were something you really started working with when you were younger too. And I know you guys have done a lot of stuff in leopard geckos. You want to talk about a few of your highlights over the years in the leopard gecko breeding?
Yeah, leopard geckos were really fun, and it's actually a really cool species to work with. Because they're kind of known as like a beginner species and something that's relatively straightforward and real easy and not really that difficult. But the one thing is, there's a lot of things you can do with them as far as line breeding and just color combinations and just messing with polygenetics, just selectively breeding. Because almost every morph you see in leopard geckos, you'll see a large variety, and most of it's polygenetic traits you're seeing with a lot of those leopard gecko mutations. I mean, other than looking at super snows and snows and Trumper albinos, but all those end up having polygenetics involved in them as well that accelerate or change them and everything and make the projects a lot more diverse. And the thing with leopard geckos is you can see a faster turnover in results of line breeding versus any other species, because leopard geckos are very prolific and you can breed them at 10, 12 months old. Sometimes you can even breed them younger if they reach adult size, especially your males. I used to breed males when I bred leopard geckos with my dad. We used to breed males at sometimes 7 months old. If they were 50 grams, and we could put them to a female that was, producing egg follicles, or you could. That's the other thing. Leopard geckos are very easy to see. Fat-tailed geckos too. The egg follicles in their bellies, and so you can know really when to pair them. And so you could get a turnover where most species might take 2 years before you have a generation, the next generation. Leopard geckos, you could have the next generation in 10, 12 months. And so over a course of 7 years, you could see 7 generations of line breeding, versus with other species, you're going to be lucky to, in 7 years, to see, even 4. You might be more around 3, 4, you might be, 4 generations. So it's really good to learn, the power of line breeding and what you can do with it and the way it kind of works. And it's just it's a lot of work, especially when you're breeding leopard geckos like my dad and I did, and fat-tailed geckos, because if you do it on a larger scale, you're pretty much constantly having babies, and they eat a lot and they also shit a lot. So you have a lot of work there. It's a lot of maintenance. It's almost like farming. Because it's all right, you got your females, you got to check them for egg follicles, breed them, you have babies hatching, then you have, shipments. We did wholesale on a lot of reptile, shows, and then updating the website and all that.
How's the leopard gecko market these days? I know it had a little bit of a downturn, but it seems like people are getting back into them again.
Yeah, it's decent. It's not as good as it was at one time. When leopard geckos really seemed to take off was like the mid 2000s. It was really around the time Ron Tremper released the Eclipse trait, which is most known for being in the combined with the Tremper albino gene, making what they call raptors. And at that time, they got really popular in Europe. And so there was a big explosion, not only in the US, but then also the interest in color morphs and starting to, breed leopard geckos again. And just with more morphs and everything. Because at the time, there weren't that many morphs available over in Europe. I mean, there were a few base traits, but not a lot of people were, I think, breeding leopard geckos on a larger scale or working with projects at least towards the end goal. And so when the Eclipse and Raptor gene were available and we started big, we were just doing a lot of shipments to the Ham Germany shows for people to pick them up there. And at that time, there was, lines of tangerines and snows who had just recently came out. So the hot things at the time were the Max Super Snows and, Eclipse and Raptors, and then just pretty combinations of tangerine, Tremper albinos. And actually, yes, soon after that too, the Enigma came out, and that kind of just accelerated the whole European, hobby aspect of leopard geckos over there and got a lot more people interested. And then soon to follow after that was kind of the whole Asian market, especially Hong Kong and China.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then since then, it's kind of there hasn't been a lot of new morphs coming out. The most notable one would be Black Knights. And that's a really cool trait because that's all done through a selective breeding. That's a line bred trait, but it acts extremely powerful when you outcross. So you can take a Black Knight and breed it to something, and if you breed it back, you're immediately getting really dark babies. And that's a trait that end goal is to get a pretty much near jet black leopard gecko. And they're kind of hard because you could breed two all black ones together, and since it's a polygenetic trait and it's variable and it's not a thing that runs 100% true, you can breed two all black ones together and you'll still get some that have pattern. And they're not pitch black, but just kind of an overall dark appearance. And, so there's a lot you can do with that trait still. Because I've seen people crossing them with stuff like blood mandarins, and they're getting blood mandarins because from the name you can already tell it's a dark tangerine, line bred trait. And they're getting ones that are having the black pigmentation kind of masking the overall orange pigmentation and everything on the saddles. And so you got kind of this hazy looking, emerine looking leopard geckos. Emerines are ones where they're kind of greenish on the saddle and then kind of a reddish orange background. And so you're getting these ones that have kind of a black, greenish saddles with kind of an orange background, a real dirty coloration. And so that's the thing with line breeding. I mean, you could take ones that are line bred to be almost all black and breed them to these ones that are high speckled with tangerine coloration, and you can get these dirty mix of black and orange ones. And then you can get ones that have barely any Black Knights showing up because, it's just not showing up real strongly in that individual. But if you breed it back, they'll probably react and make it a lot more prominent in the next generation. And so then you could start the line breed ones that are more orange and black, or you can breed the ones that have more of that emerine kind of look coming through, where it's a greenish black, and just go in that direction. So there's so many different things you can do with leopard geckos. And that's, I guess, how I kind of really wanted to get into leopard geckos. Because when I first showed interest in them at the reptile shows, I seen a lot of different colorations, just different tangerines, high yellows, Tremper albinos, and then a lot of, jungle stuff and bold stripe stuff. And, most of those were polygenetic outside, the traits I seen that were Tremper albino and blizzard and Murphy patternless.
So you mentioned something in there about the European market and, you're sending things over. Can you talk a little bit about, and kind of maybe a little bit of detail too, about exporting animals? I'm assuming you still export animals, maybe not right at this very moment because of what's going on in the world, but you still export animals, and you export them all over the world. Can you talk to us about what brought you to that point and kind of how you have to do it? A lot of people are man, I'd love to export some animals, but where do you start? And I know we kind of got into a little bit of buying or getting the permits and things like that, but we never really exported anything. And we're always interested in understanding what people do and how they do it. And so I'm told that you export kind of a lot. So
well, decent amount. I import and export non-CITES species, though. I kind of don't like. I don't mess with any CITES when it comes to importation exportation. So I don't know what species you guys do. Do you breed like ball pythons and other like pythons or boas?
Yeah.
Ball pythons, blue tongue skinks. We imported some blue tongues before, and never imported or exported ball pythons yet. But
okay, well, ball pythons are actually the easiest I know with CITES because you can get the master CITES, and they're the most popular CITES species that's being imported and exported. But you basically just have to kind of go through like a Fish and Wildlife and apply for an import-export permit. And you'd actually have to call them and see about the CITES. The CITES stuff, I think they have to come out to your place and they have to see how many individual like kind of breeders you have. And I think that's how they base their master CITES, like on how many, like they kind of like, I guess how many babies you could produce from said females. That information might be inaccurate though, because I don't really mess with too many CITES species. So I do breed a few ball pythons and rainbow boas, but I don't import or export those. But you can apply for master CITES, but applying for just regular importation exportation is fairly easy unless you have a felony. If you have a felony, you're probably not going to be able to get one. So as long as you have a felony, like me, you can just apply through Fish and Wildlife and everything, and you can ask them, and they'll direct you in the right direction. And
yep.
You just have to go through. You got to give them your address, other information that they require. I don't even remember because I keep renewing mine. I don't even really remember the first time. Like I know it wasn't like it didn't take that long and it wasn't that difficult. But when you get
not too bad.
Species, I think it's that can be tough because sometimes you have to apply individually, and that's why I breed actually a lot of non-CITES species. Most of them I got lucky because my main interests are in geckos and then specifically like Western hognose snakes. I like them a lot, and it's really nice to work with non-CITES species because they're very easy to transport without having any hassle.
So, and then once you get the permit, how would I go about if I had the permit? How would I go about sending animals?
If you live in like Miami or say like somewhere in California, and there's ones in like Chicago too where you can export yourself, or you could hire a broker and go through a broker to kind of sort out all the logistics, and then they use your import export permit, and they basically are saying like, hey, we're shipping it on behalf of so and so, and then it goes through official wildlife inspection, whether it's coming in or going out, and that's pretty much it. And so for like the ham shows, what we would typically do is export over there and then pick it up myself. I'd export it to myself and pick it up. And the first time I went with somebody else, and I declared the shipment on my own, and that was pretty nerve-wracking because I was like 19 at the time. And I don't even know if I'd been out of the country at that time. At that point, it didn't really matter, but I was just kind of like nervous, and it took a little while to clear the stuff over there. I remember it took like 6 hours. And I used to clear through the same guy. And so every time I'd go over to Germany and export over there and clear the animals myself, I'd go with my one friend that was from Holland, or my other friends, Torsten and Bjorn from Germany. And we had cleared shipments and everything. And the guy that would clear my stuff, he spoke pretty decent English. Most people over there speak English, so it's not that hard to get around. It's not like you're in a real foreign place because, most people are fairly friendly. But the guy that cleared my stuff, at Dusseldorf, he really didn't like the United States or Americans. And so the entire time, for like about an hour or two, like when he'd go through some of the paperwork to clear everything, he would just bitch to me about the United States and everything that was wrong with it. And he was kind of clearing my stuff and, would also charge for it. And so I just have to be nice to him. And so I'd agree with them. Like anytime he said anything about the United States, I was like, yeah, it's horrible living there. And I'd agree with him. Like, yeah, man. It's like, I was just born there. I can't do anything about it. I want to leave so bad, even though I don't. Yeah, just go through the whole thing and everything, and just like if you shit talk to the United States and you say things about you went over there one time and the banks were horrible. I'm like, yeah, I was like, I don't even know why anybody keeps money there. You know, just stuff.
That's good.
That's
So,
funny.
now, did you vend Japanese shows at one point also?
What shows?
Oh, did you say you vended in Japan at
Yeah,
all?
yeah. I used to go to the Shizuoka show over there. I would like to go back, but I've had some health issues and everything, and very sensitive, as Dave knows. Dave knows the whole background of this. Very sensitive to food poisoning, so I gotta be very careful. I shouldn't even say that. Somebody's gonna try to poison me now. Somebody out there doesn't like me, and they're gonna fuck with my food. But anyway, so yeah, I used to go over to it. Actually, that was the best time I ever had, is going over to Japan. Japan's awesome. They're pretty lax over there. It's a very safe country, very fun. It's very different in all ways. Like, you know, so if you want to get food there, food is extremely different. Like they have noodle shops. You know, they have food, like, you know, places where you could go and you just like select something on a vending machine, and you know, they give you like just different course meals, and it probably doesn't sound interesting, but when I was eating there, I don't know exactly, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was always really good. And then we go to like a lot of different specialty restaurants, and there's just so much over there because it's like we'd always be like outside of Tokyo, and except for when we're in Shizuoka, because that's a couple hours from Tokyo. But even out there, there's just always something to do. So like if you're like, I'd be mostly staying in like the Yokohama area. And if you wanted to go out and have like sushi or get a barbecue at 3 a.m., you could. You know, it's a very happening city. There's lights are on everywhere. You know, you can always go out and do whatever you wanted. And you know, the malls there, there'd be all kinds of like cool malls to go to, where you'd have like, you know, anime shops, and you know, just everything was very different. There wasn't anything that was like that similar to the United States. And the shows over there were cool too. You know, you'd see a lot of interesting species. Like I got to hold like baby river otters and interact with them. There's a guy with a toucan, and I was asking him if I could hold that, and he's like, "No, I can't hold my toucan." And hold a giant Indonesian flying squirrel, and it was like huge. It was like, it took up like my whole torso. And actually, Brian Barczyk was there, and he was like at that one, and I think it was the flying squirrel, and I was holding it, and then Brian's like, you know, holding something else, and I'm like, "Do you want to hold the giant flying?" Or somebody offered it to him. He's like, "I don't know about that," and they're like, "No, just hold it. It's fine." Then he's like, "All right, I'll hold that then." And then they FedEx foxes, and the one time they had, I think it was thorny devils there, the Australian thorny devils, and they were there on display. Yeah, nobody ever. Yeah, those aren't something that's like kept in captivity. And
Right.
Steve Sykes was there, and he went over there and looked at them. And I kept meaning to go over there, and I was like, I'll go over there in a minute. And then like at the end of the show, oh shit, I forgot to go. I was like, I'll go tomorrow. And then I ended up not seeing those. But yeah, and they had a lot of owls there too. Like you'd have all kinds. And my friend who's into wildlife rehabilitation, he's in the Western Cleveland area, and he rehabilitates a lot of wildlife. And his he's just real into birds. So his forte is like knowing native species of birds and everything, North American and outside North America. But I showed him a bunch of the owls, and he was, man, they have them just lined up like that, because he's like, certain species, goes, that species of that size would eat that one, and they were just all on this row, sitting there on display, and they'd had just these little links on the base of their legs and everything, so they couldn't like try to like fly or get away. But most of them were pretty cool, and they'd let you hold the baby like burrowing owls, and they had great horned owls and a few other species. I don't know too much about birds, and they had some hawks there too, and falcons, but I didn't hold any of those. But yeah, there's a lot of neat stuff there.
So I'm trying to get an idea of scale at this show. When it comes to the size of the show, what show would you compare it to in the United States size-wise?
It's not very large. I mean, it's big, but it's not like teaming with vendors. It's not like super easy to get into. I'd imagine they have a pretty long wait list, but if you're from overseas, they usually make an exception. And I don't know if they've expanded, but there's other shows over there, and I think they're all around pretty much the same size. But the Shizuoka show, the main show, I'd say it's about half the size of Tinley, but 1/4 of it, they don't really have animals to display. They have stuff over there to display, not to purchase, but like, things that you can see. And then they have like kind of like a little auction stage. Might be slightly smaller than that. Slightly smaller than half the size of Tinley. It's probably a little bigger than Hamburg, but it's a nice show. They have all the bird people and all the people that breed owls and the exotic stuff like river otters and fennec foxes, and one guy had flamingos. They have them up toward the north side of the show, and the south side is kind of people with regular reptiles. And one cool thing about that show is that's probably the most Bowen's pythons I've ever seen was going to the Japan shows. There'd always be a few people there with like sub-adult or adult, and sometimes even young Bowen's pythons. And you could probably, some shows I'd see 6 or 10 Bowen's pythons. I don't know if they're still that common over there. Well, I wouldn't use the word common, but at least if there's still that many when you go to the shows.
Yeah, you get one or none here, so that's pretty.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing. When I see them over there, I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool, Bowen's python. And I'd see them from time to time in the United States, and now I don't even remember the last time I even seen one over here. But when I go over there, there'd always be a few. There'd always be at least 4 or 5 Bowen's pythons there.
That's cool.
Yeah, Kevin had one at Tinley in October.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, pretty much the only person I can think of now that has them is Kevin. I know he's got a few, and the prices have drastically increased. I seen what he is asking for his. I'm like, man, they went up quite a bit. I don't know. I think they're not. I don't know if they're still allowing export for them out of Indonesia, and because I know that's where they would get some of their, bull pythons over there in Japan, and I'm sure over in the United States as well. I don't know if they have a number cap that they're allowed to export out of there, or if they're being restricted now from the farm-raised babies, or I don't know how that deal over there works, because again, that's with CITES species. So
sure. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing with Bowen's too. Like, I think it was like 2005 or 6. I was offered a Bowen's for like $800 or $1,200.
What?
Now the price is absolutely insane.
Yeah. That's what I was looking at getting, like possibly Bowen's, but they'd be a cool species to have. They'd be one of those ones that are extremely difficult to breed in captivity, and they're very, very interesting looking constrictors. With the iridescence, and I know they come from like cooler climates, and they've even found where they in their habitat and where they find them and can get down to as low as like 40 degrees, and they'll find them, selling themselves in these like cooler temperatures. And I think somebody sent me a video, and it was Kevin's, and he had a setup where he had kind of an arboreal setup. He had like a basking light for him, and so I'd imagine he kind of kept the ambient temp kind of on the cool side, or at least moderate. And so then for him to really warm, they have to get under that basking spot, which is pretty. He had a pretty good setup for getting him close to like just replicating their, wild habitat and everything, which is, probably key to getting them to go. And I think they might be more of like a montane species. So maybe if you lived in like Denver or higher elevations, maybe that would help. But I don't know much about them. I do know they're cool as shit though.
Yeah, we've always talked about that, the elevation thing, and possibly being a factor.
Yeah, I could see it being a factor, especially with the lack of success a lot of people are having. So it's like, okay, there's got to be a reason for that. Might be something in diet too. You might want to supplement with more vitamins, because I don't know. I mean, you're saying people are getting, success with emerald tree boas and green tree pythons, and I imagine their diet is kind of similar. That's one thing I would actually like to know. I kind of wonder what Bowen's eat in the wild, if they're eating more like, tree dwelling, like kind of rodents, or if they're coming down to the ground to hunt and they're eating primarily rodents, or if they're eating, lizards, or if they're eating, birds too, or bird eggs, maybe raiding a nest. I mean, I've never corn snakes and like black rat snakes, they often raid bird nests and everything, will eat eggs. So, I mean, that wouldn't surprise me to see a python eating eggs, even though it's not typical, behavior you're seeing from like a python.
Yeah, we can ask Ari.
Yeah, you can always put in chicken eggs with one, and if it doesn't eat, and then it's like, it's like that's not something that doesn't ever raid like nests in a while, so it doesn't have interest in it. And then it's like, okay, that's kind of looks stupid for thinking that it maybe ate bird eggs, possibly. And if they did, it'd probably be at like a younger age too, because they get pretty big, and it would take a lot of eggs and pretty large eggs for her to fill up a larger one. So yeah, I kind of figured that because Bolins, they get like 10 foot long, I think, around there.
So talking more about the breeding, because I feel like everybody in this industry loves the challenge, and that's why a lot of people went out and got them when they were able to get them. But so there has been some hybridizations between using a male Bowens and putting it with, I think, a carpet python, and I'm not sure if they've done it with anything else.
Oh, really? I didn't know they did hybrids with Bolins. I know makes sense. I mean, they do the green trees and the carpets, and I'd imagine a Bolins, especially because they're from just north of Australia in like the New Guinea area, I believe. And there's carpet pythons where you got the Eringias, but in Australia and everything, you'd imagine the look of the carpet python, the size and everything, that they kind of have maybe similar, diets too, possibly.
Well, I guess one of my questions was with that after I saw it, because actually I just saw that, I saw it last night. Now with the males being able to cycle, because it was a male Bowens in the pairing, do you think it could be more with something to do with the follicle development in a female that's a little more difficult? Like you said, whether it's something dietary, pressures, temperature, and that could be one of the bigger issues, not so much with the male, but with the female Bowens?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, if these guys are getting like visual locks with their Bowens, and then the common thing is their females slugging out, I'd actually almost wonder if it's a temperature thing. Because usually when you're having fertile males like that, because obviously you have the Bowens male and he's fertilizing the carpet female and they're getting good eggs. Now, if they're doing that, like how many like hybrids have they done like that? Just like one or two?
You know what? It was just, I can't remember who I talked to about it last night, and I got the picture and we could put it up as we're talking about this. But I know at least with the carpet python, I'm not sure if they've done anything else.
Yeah, it might be more of an issue than with the people with they're doing Bowens. Maybe it could be an issue with their females, and the males are completely fertile. If the males fertilizing a carpet female that easily, I wouldn't think it's just luck. Yeah, it might have something to do with the female, and that could be diet. I mean, even adding like supplements to their diet, I don't think that would be. That's definitely not going to hurt anything. Kevin's setup, I believe his, bulbs he's seen with, they got to be UVB. And so he's probably got that covered. But I'm wondering if cooler temperatures, you might want, I'm sure he might do it, and it might maybe taking things from another species you breed, like ball pythons, and, going over them with an ultrasound to try to, better your success. Maybe if you have like two Bowens males, and I'd probably breed them at the lower range of temperatures. I mean, because the Brazilian rainbow bows are actually a very easy species to breed, and that's a species I don't have a lot of, but I've kind of kept them from the time I was 18, and I breed a few here and there. And I've talked to people that think Brazilian rainbow bows are kind of tough or didn't have much success. And all that lack of success was pretty much just correlated to them keeping them at too high temperatures, because Brazilian rainbows come from northern Brazil, Guyana, French Guiana, and like parts of Suriname, and all those areas are kind of like cooler temperature rainforest. The average like temperature is like in the mid 70s year round. They just have like a dry season, then a rainy season, and these things are living more in kind of like the swampy, marshy areas. And if you breed them and you just keep them in the high 70s, low 80s, you're probably going to have pretty good success. But if you're keeping them at higher temperatures, they definitely don't appreciate the higher temperatures. And it's kind of like, I know blood pythons are kind of like that too. So some people are like, you keep your blood pythons at high temps, they're actually more defensive and nippy. And if you keep them at more their kind of comfortable temperatures, like blood pythons actually kind of, I guess, prefer it like low 80s and even up to like high 70s. They don't really like these real hot climates that people think they might like, or some people might think they like. So, and that's the thing with Brazilian rainbows. I'd actually noticed that my adult males would digest like full size rat meals at like 72 degrees. So if they're able to fully digest stuff at 72 degrees with like no issues and everything, and they're obviously and just by looking at their climate from where they're at, they don't really like that high of temperatures. And I've always, that's the one issue too with me selling Brazilians. And I always try to go over with people, especially new keepers. I'm like, hey, these things don't like it hot. Don't put a bulb in there, and don't have a spot in there that's like over 90 degrees, because you can kill them with those real high temperatures. And because some people put them in an area and have like a hot spot of like 95, and even if the ambient temperature is acceptable on the cool side, sometimes they end up still killing them like that. And so I'm assuming Bolin's where they come from, and just what I've heard, that the cooler temperatures might be key to them, and then having those kind of basking spots like Kevin has set up then, and like maybe keeping them in the 70s.
So we spoke with we did an interview with Robin Markland from Pro Exotics. I don't know. I just
formerly
Pro Exotics. So he had a few Bolin's pythons as well, and they would check for the follicles, and the follicles would grow. They'd have a ton of follicles, and then just nothing would happen. They'd have the male in there, they'd lock, they'd see locks, and nothing happened.
The problem is the females would reabsorb, is what they wouldn't even slug out.
Right. Yeah, they reabsorb them. That's pretty interesting, especially if they're getting locks from the male. Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, you kind of wonder, like, I mean, they're reabsorbing them. It's like, yeah, why are they reabsorbing them? Or to tell, like, I think that the temperatures really wouldn't affect, because if they're being bred and they're stimulated, and they're bred, the female has a sperm, she has the follicles, they're maturing, and then they go past and they reabsorb. I mean, I've seen that with Western Hognose, and I mean, they're obviously way easier species to breed. They're pretty beginner level species. They're a little more difficult than certain colubrids, and they're definitely quirky, and they're not extremely straightforward, and will definitely throw some curveballs at you, especially if you're breeding multiples. But the egg follicle reabsorption, I mean, seems kind of be more sporadic with them, and not like something I can actually pinpoint. I do know if you, again, supplementing, when you supplement them, it's less likely to happen. But again, I mean, I've seen, I've seen Bolin slug out, and then there are also ones reabsorbing them. And so the ones are being reabsorbed, it almost sounds like they're not being obviously fertilized, because the ones that are reabsorbing, and then there's other ones that are ovulating and going through the whole cycle, but then they're slugging out. So, yeah, that's a tricky one.
Okay. Well,
I thought we're gonna be. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Bolin's pythons. They're cool. I love this species, but I'm like, man, we're talking about Bolin's python, talking about ideas to breed them, and I've never even friggin' kept one. I mean, I've seen ideas from other species or things that could maybe help, but I'm probably definitely not the best person to ask. I don't know. Has Kevin had any luck with them?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. We won't get into that, I guess.
Well, okay, so Diana, skink breeder, she posted something on her business page a few months ago of a breeder in Europe that showed the whole process. He showed the Bowens next to a newspaper, I think when it ovulated, showed it next to a newspaper as it was laying eggs, like I'm not screwing around, I actually made this happen. I've never researched that breeder, but I know I stumbled across that a few months ago when he posted it. So, yeah, people can be successful with it. I don't think many people in the United States have been.
There's only
it's got to be a very short list, maybe less than 3 or 4 people in all honesty, and that might even be too many. I don't know.
I think there was a guy in the Netherlands that's done twice in a year. He's gotten very small, like 3 or 4 eggs that he's actually gotten to come to term and produce babies. And that guy in Costa Rica has done it a couple of times. But you're talking about large pythons that should produce, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20, maybe even 30 eggs.
Right.
And you're getting 3. Like, I don't know if you call that success. Like, you got them to do the process, but I don't know.
They're on the right track, at least. They got a little bit of it. They're on the coattails of.
Yeah. They're right there.
I know in Europe it's more common for them to do big, terrariums and more like bioactive kind of setups. Mm-hmm. So maybe that guy is doing something more like that. I mean, that could be the key, and that's like kind of seen Kevin set up, and I was like, the person that sent me the video, and I seen that, I was like, that seems like a pretty decent setup. Is large. He had arboreal areas from the basque, and I mean, yeah, it just seems like there's something like pretty key missing, and I don't know if maybe I don't know. You wouldn't think they'd be a species that like breeds in like balls or anything like that, where you'd have like multiple males, but maybe having multiple males might help, especially if they're getting some success, but it's real low fertility. because David and I talk about like green anacondas. Green anacondas is another big, difficult species to breed. And when people do get them to reproduce, typically there seems to be a lot of infertile, slugs in the litters as well. And actually, I know, Kevin, I know he had a pretty good sized litter of those, and that's another difficult one to breed. I think that species, though, the issue with that one might be because, they show up right in the wild when they're breeding. There's like 5, 6, 7 males all trying to breed one female. And to me, that seems like, well, most people are just doing single pair, so maybe the multiple males and then breeding them in, large pools of water is going to, help you get better fertility with those guys.
I've heard that with some of the bigger females, the anacondas, but I've been talking more with like Megan Kelly, and I've been talking a lot with Blake lately. And Nerdist had their success also. I don't know if it's actually that difficult of a species to breed. Just not many people have ever had to try to breed them because in the past they were so readily available for imports. Right. So there wasn't a big drive for it. But there's been quite a few different breeders that have had success with them over the last few years, and I just wonder if it was a lack of trying over the years.
Yeah. Does Megan get pretty good litters as far as fertility and everything?
Fertility's also really good with her, I found. Very low percentage of slugs. She usually has a camera in with her cage. So, if mom's going around collecting those slugs, she'll see it afterwards. But, Ryan made a comment about with the Bowens. I don't really know how many eggs that species has on average. And like with anacondas, there was a recent litter that she had, and this anaconda was probably about 10 to 12 years old, and it was giant. And it only had 9 or 10 babies and no slugs. So with that, I don't think it's necessarily age, but year after year, I know the litters are going to get bigger. But for such a big species, you'd think there'd be a lot. But for some of the younger females or the females that have only had a litter or two, it's a very small litter.
Yeah, it is. I'd expect the green anacondas to have larger litters, so that's interesting. It's definitely probably not going to be too much wear on the mom, though, having that small litter, especially at that size, like a 10, 12-year-old female. But yeah, like boas and stuff, I do know they lay bigger clutches. They have bigger litters the older they get. So, that's pretty old, though, like 10, 12 years old. I wonder if, like, you have green anaconda females that are, like, 20 years old, if they start having litters, like, they have, like, 20, 30-plus babies in them. That's how, like,
so another thing, with the big girl that just went for her not too long ago, I think it was, like, December, January, that female was 10, 12 years old, but she was a virgin. So that was her first litter. And it was actually exactly 10 babies.
Wow. Yeah. Because my Brazilians, when I breed them, and they're another species that's, they're small. And their next closest relative are actually like anacondas, like yellow anacondas, the next closest, relative species to like rainbow boas. And then, there's other things related to like the epicrets, like, the Puerto Rican boas and stuff like that. But my Brazilians, when I breed them at like 4 or 5 years old, because it's a species that, people bred them younger, but if you talk to the bigger rainbow boa breeders, they typically, the age helps a lot. Like a lot of my Brazilians won't start breeding until they're 4 or 5 years old. And I actually had a male that wouldn't even touch or show any interest in a female until he was like about 6 or 7. But when they breed around the age of 5, usually around for the first time, typically their litters are around like 8, 10, 12 babies, sometimes a little more. And then I had a female I picked up that was like, I think closer to 20 years old. And she was like a little over 6 foot long. And she'd have litters. And he is actually getting rid of her because he thought she was getting too old to breed. But I know a lot of boas can live, if you kept them, keep them real healthy. A lot of them can live to late 30s. And, I've seen like Tracy Barker and stuff. And she had like Kenyan Sambo that's having babies. We were talking about that one time, Dave, is having like babies in the late 20s. And so I was like, this Brazilian was like late teens, close to 20. I'm like, she still breed for many years. And so she has litters of like 22 to 23, 24 babies. And that same guy had a female that was like close to 20 years old, and it had like a litter of 39 babies. So age, and then maybe that's one of the things with Bolins too, although I know these guys had them for a while. So I'm thinking age isn't as big of a deal with them, but age always seems to help. It seems with a lot of those species.
Oh, Ryan, or I'm sorry, either you guys have something, or you want me to keep going?
I had a 101 question. Since we're talking about kind of, breeding things, what about a species that you work with, like Hognose? So a lot of people have trouble starting hognose when they're babies on eating. Can you give some tips to people that are listening on starting hognose?
Yeah. That's what I breed. So we should be talking about those probably more.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I love the bones conversation.
Yeah, me too. But
That's interesting.
Yeah, we'll keep talking about a species I never kept before. See how we can brainstorm over breeding Boelen's pythons from afar. This guy has them. He's got a light on. I think this is how he does it. Hognose, that's the one kind of like the one kind of a misconception that, or one can't think of the word. But the one thing that people think about the hognose line is like, hey, they can be stubborn feeders when they first hatch. And that can be somewhat true for a small percentage of them. But one thing is keeping them at, good stable temperatures. If you have a warmer ambient temperature, that helps a lot. If you have them like at an ambient temp of like 81, 82, 83, even 84, that's going to help a lot. In a hot spot of high 80s to low 90s, you can even go a little hotter. It's not necessary. But the first thing is they hatch, and they typically shed within hours or a day after they shed or after they hatch. And so, like with other cooler breeds, most people are like, oh, you have corn face wait until their first shed, which is about a week after. So hognose, I've had them eat as early as 3 or 4 days after hatching, but most will not eat that quickly. They hatch out with pretty large yolk sacs. And there's actually a bunch of different tips I could give you. I've noticed if you hatch them in an egg box with, like, I keep them on coco coir. If you hatch them in an egg box and you leave them in there for, say, 5, 7 days, 8 days, keep it misted so they stay hydrated and they can drink the water droplets, or the soil's usually moist enough where they don't have to, they don't really even get thirsty until probably like a week out. But if you feed them together, your success rate of them eating from where they first hatch is a lot higher. And that probably has to do with them being in familiar, grounds, and instinctively they've hatched. All the other baby scents are around them, and when I keep them together, you actually have a way better feeding rate. And I actually don't do that often, even though you have a good success. I do typically still separate them, and the reason for that is it's just kind of like when you're hatching out hundreds of them and keeping them all together. When you feed them, you kind of have to keep an eye out. Because as they're done feeding, some of those ones will still be pretty aggressive towards feeding, and they're still pretty stimulated from that just that recent feeding, and they might smell food on another one and immediately go to start chewing on them, or they might start trying to devour a pinky that the other one has in its mouth. So when I'd feed them like that, obviously you got to watch them. So you got to sit there with them all in front of you and just kind of make sure everything goes right. And then if they're all done and fed and everything, and you missed them, you kind of wash them off and kind of get them like a little disturbed afterwards. So they're kind of like, disinterested from food and everything. And they kind of go into more of like a flight defensive response after they're done feeding versus being in food mode. And, you wash off their face with the spray bottle to get that mouth scent, and you can put them somewhere warm. And then you can do that a following feeding, then set them up, or you could feed them that first time and then immediately set them up. But what I do is I hatch them. I usually do leave them in the egg box for about 5 days to a week. They hatch out with pretty large yolk sacs. And then I set them up in my rack systems. I individually label them like this. These are a little bigger enclosure kind of for them when they first hatch. They grow into them, though. But, your average baby hognose is around like 4, 5, 6, 7 grams, depending. I've hatched them all the way from like 1 gram up to 13 grams. Anything over 9 grams is pretty large. So I'm getting a lot of 5 to 7 gram babies. And I'll set them up, and I usually give them, and the thing is, I've had babies that don't eat for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then they start showing interest. So when you first go to feed them, if they're only 5, 7 days old and like half of them don't eat, or 3/4, definitely don't be like discouraged or think it's anything you're doing wrong. They just might not have their full appetite up yet. And there's a bunch of different tricks you can do. The first thing I ever learned to do was when I was 14, I'd give them frozen thawed pinks, and I'd have babies that would refuse to eat. And so I would just tear the pinky's face open and squeeze some of the brains out of the frozen thawed pink, put it up to their mouth, and they would start drinking a lot of the fluids, and they'd show interest and grab it. And I kind of was like, well, they're drinking it. So then I started dipping them in water and then doing that, tearing the face a little bit, dipping in water, and then just getting that act of them drinking. Because the thing is, if you can get them to drink and you can get them to stop to drink, for one, you're getting them kind of out of their explore, kind of like, looking around mode. Even if they are just sitting there, and you just put that right up to their mouth and just start letting them drink. For one, they're drinking it, so they're going to taste it. That's going to go over to Jacobson's organ in the roof of their mouth, and that's going to stimulate their appetite. So you'll see them actually. You can even see the change. You put it right up to their mouth. You see them drinking, their cheeks moving, everything. And you just kind of see them stop, and then they'll just grab it a lot of times. And you don't even need to typically scent. And I call that kind of like the water trick. You just dip the pinky head in water. And sometimes you don't even need to tear the pinky's face. But tearing the pinky's face and squeezing a little bit, getting a little bit of that blood and juices in there, gives them a little more flavor for them to, discern that that's, a food item. And then you can do that same trick. And that trick works really well with scenting because, for one, you're getting them to drink. So you're getting them to taste it and everything. So that's the best way for any scenting method also. Because if you give, let's say, a frog or toad scent, and then they're drinking with a frog or toad scent on that pinky, then again, they are, taking that in through drinking, and they're tasting that, and then they're probably going to get a feeding response. And you can use frogs for scenting. I use the frog leg. I make frog leg broth. That seems like a really good idea, but it really doesn't work that great. I would get frog legs and I would cook it down into like a stock with bones and everything, like you'd make a chicken stock. And I would keep it individually in cups. And when you make a stock too, it brings out more, like, say if you're making a chicken stock for, like, you're making a soup for your family, that brings out a lot of the flavor. So I'm like, you know what? This is a good fucking idea I came up with. This is going to be like the end all to getting Hognose to eat. And it works like maybe like 10%, 20% better than the water trick. It's not like son of a bitch. Sardine juice works really well. And I think it's because it's so strong. And if you smell like frogs too and everything, not that most people do that, but they kind of have a fishy smell a little bit. And if you eat frog legs, it even has a bit of a fishy taste. And so like the sardine juice is just really strong and potent. And that gets a pretty good reaction out of them. Sardine juice, I tell a lot of people that, and they'll come back. You can use toads and everything in frogs, salamanders. I've actually had one that would eat salamander scent and then not eat frog scent. And then salamander scent works for quite a few. And you're like, this is like way better than frog. And then I'll try salamander scent. And then other ones don't want it. And I try frog scent. And then they do eat it. Or they want sardine. But it typically, when I'm getting ones on frog or salamander scent or anything like that, that's because the sardine juice isn't working. And then another thing is live pinks. Live pinks work pretty well, and then you can even scent a live pink. Because I've had baby hognose that aren't too interested in feeding, and you put in a live pink, even though I hate feeding live, and they'll go towards to the live because of that movement and everything. And small percentage want live, but it definitely helps. If you have like a bunch of hognose that haven't eaten a few times in a row and you throw in live, probably a good 50-60% of those are going to eat a live pink.
So when you're talking about using all these different techniques, what percentage would you say of your baby hognose you actually have to go to these extremes?
Well, here's the thing. It's like pretty much any species. Like I'll go to more depth what I mean by that. When I talk to like a ball python breeder and they like might see what I do with hognose, they're like, man, that seems like a bitch. I don't want to, that sounds like a lot of work. But then I look at a ball python breeder and like, yeah, I got to feed mine African soft furs and I breed rats. I'm like, man, that sounds fucking horrible. I would never do that. And I get the same thing like ball python breeders breeding leopard geckos and leopard gecko breeders breeding ball pythons. When you get used to like a couple species or like one species that you're particularly, breeding or you're interested is in, once you figure it out, all of these little techniques don't really seem like much of a nuisance. Because I basically have my computer right now on my one food cart. What I'll do is I'll lay out paper, butcher paper and everything, and I'll have my pinkies, and I'll have cups of water, and I'll have cups of sardine, and I'll just take pinky, and I'll go through in a row, and like this is the very first rack I had over here that started eating for me this past season because they were the first babies to hatch, and I would pretty much always go with the water trick right away because if you're doing it right away, it's actually, for one, you're getting a lot better feeding rate. Like I got like 95% of those babies. I was actually kind of surprised because it was like my brand new building and brand new setup. And I was like, okay, the air temperature is a little off. I kind of moved these things around a lot. I was like, I'm thinking I'm going to have a pretty poor success rate. And I think I'm going to get pissed off here real quick. Talk about stop breeding hognose for the millionth time. Then once you get it goes back to normal, it's fun again. But I went through like 95% of them all ate. But I just go through. I take the pinky and tear just the nose a little bit and just dip it in water. And then I just go take out the tub and put it right up to their mouth and get them to, grab it and everything and hold it there. And if they don't, I'd leave it in there. And then I'd come back and take them out. And again, if you leave them in there, especially on their first go of feeding or even the second go, if you leave the pinky in there with torn face and water or even scented, usually the success rate for them coming back and eating that is fairly low. So definitely go back through and make sure to take the pinkies out. And then that's pretty much what I did. I just go through and use the water trick. And as they become better feeders and more stronger feeders, I kind of get away from that. And I stop dipping their heads in water. And so a lot of them, you don't even have to tear their face. You just dip them in water. So you just have them set up. You just dip them in water and put it right up to their face. So it really isn't, too difficult to do. And then there's another thing to do. Here's actually one of my big fail safes. And actually my friend gave me this idea because he actually had some baby hognose. They weren't eating for him. And it made a lot of sense. He's like, well, these things are not eating. And he cools all the stuff at the same time of year. And it's my friend John. And so he cooled all of them along with a couple of these poor feeders. And I was over there and he goes, yeah, man. He goes, this one wasn't eating. He goes, I took it out, cool down. He goes, now I think he eats great. I'm like, that makes a lot of sense because they hatch out very late in the season from a lot of ranges that they live in. Even in Montana, they're hatching out like early October, end of September. And they're pretty much hatching out into the fall season and the downturn of the season when it's getting closer to hibernating and going into brumation. So most of these baby hognose, I know in the wild, they are not eating after they hatch. That's why they have large yolk sacs. And as in captivity, they don't really have a strong interest usually until they're a little older. And it's because, they're pretty much getting ready to go into cool down or hibernation, brumation, right out, like as soon after they're out of the egg in the wild. And some of them I'm sure are eating, especially in the more southern regions, like southwestern, like Texas and everything, and parts of New Mexico and part of their southwestern range. But they find the babies eating a lot of interesting things like lizard eggs, and if they're eating like ground skink eggs and like 6-line race runner eggs, they're not producing in the late fall. That's more of a springtime, summer thing. They're laying multiple clutches, and they're going after toadlets and froglets, and there's probably some of those in the fall for sure. Like where I live, there's a lot of gray tree frog and spring peeper metamorphosing in the end of summer. And so those would actually be pretty much perfect hognose size. And I know in the more central regions, they have similar species like chorus frogs. And they eat a lot of tiger salamanders in the wild too. But I don't think the babies are finding too many recently metamorphosed tiger salamanders. But the one thing is, if you have a lot of babies hatch and they're not feeding, and I started doing that, I hibernate them, and when you warm them up, a lot of them are strong feeders. And then also the ambient temperature thing, because a lot of people will buy hognose, and they'll buy one that's a good feeder. And it's happened to everybody that breeds hognose. They'll have one that's feeding regularly, very well. They send it to somebody, person puts it in like a huge 40-gallon setup or 20-gallon setup, and you even kind of like, if you're like me, a lot of other breeders too, they're like, man, I sure hope that thing stays on eating because you just completely change. And a lot of it has to do with the ambient temperature and not so much the overall like large enclosure. The large enclosure can kind of throw them off, and especially if you're like hovering over them and they're all of a sudden this huge glass open area. But the ambient temperature, typically if somebody has a 40-gallon, even if they have like a hot spot that's, good, they're probably keeping it in their house. And some people keep their houses pretty cool. They might keep their house around 70 degrees. And they're coming from somewhere where like the ambient temperature in my room is more like 80 degrees. And so just that whole drop, that 10, 12 degree drop that they might have in that air temperature can kind of set them off instinctively to, want to refuse meals, which makes sense. I mean, because cooler air temperatures probably going to trigger them that way in the wild too. Hot summer days, probably eating a lot, earlier in the summer and later in the summer, where they're from, especially in the northern region, they can get pretty big temperature fluctuations. And if a front comes in and low pressure comes in and like a storm comes in and low temperatures and all that, and just that overall cool temp, like the air temp, they probably, a lot of them in the wild probably aren't looking to eat at that time. They're probably just looking to go more into, grass clumps and abandoned rodent burrows and burying themselves until it's, better temperatures come out and eat stuff and everything.
And how, just one more piece before we move on, but so if you offer food to a baby, and then it refuses, how soon do you offer again?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've actually had the Hognose refuse a meal, and then I go back 4 hours later and offer it and gotten them to eat. Now, that's not common. But with babies, for me, I have so many, and I'll kind of thaw. I'll do I won't thaw out for the entire room all in one day. This is usually like a 2-day process, and so I have like 600 babies right here, and so with 600, I'd usually thaw out 300 or 400. I go through 3 or 4 racks, and so whichever ones don't eat, they'll get like marks. Like you might see a couple like, probably can't see them, but I got some like highlighter tags back there. Yeah, it's way too small. Zoom in there. And I'll put those for the ones that are less likely to. Yeah, you still can't see it. But your eyesight's really good. And yeah, I just kind of tag those and just kind of keep them in mind. And it's like, okay, I'll go back through and offer this one, or maybe I'll offer that one live, or try to go back to sending. And that's another thing that too, because like you learn so much and you develop over the years, and you never know everything. And that's the cool thing about Hognose. They're not really straightforward. They're kind of quirky. You find there's a lot of little interesting things to them. Kind of like the hibernating and getting and brumating and getting them to eat out of brumation. I'm sure that would actually work with other species as well. But it's just not something that you really hear too many people talk about. But with the Hognose, yeah, I mean, I try like every 2-3 days. I mean, if they refuse, and you could always like scent. Some people don't like scenting though, because they think, oh, if I scent, they're going to get addicted to it. They want to be on it for a while, which really isn't the case for Hognose. Usually, like the best thing when I give them live, there's a small percentage that continuously that's all they want to eat. Most of them, though, you get their metabolism going and they're growing more, and they start getting more and more aggressive towards feeding because they're getting the hang of it. And then you can usually introduce like a frozen thawed. I had one. It was a total bitch. Wouldn't eat anything. Start getting to eat live. After 3 live meals, now the thing just like grabs your frozen thawed like aggressively. That's kind of a neat thing about Hognose. Most of them switch pretty quickly, but I have had some that take like, I had a couple females, and it's only a couple out of a few hundred. I've had it, especially with males too. It's a little more common with males, but ones that were just like finicky feeders and just eat sporadically. And then after about 12, 14 months, they just start eating, on the regular. Like I had a female that did that as an Xanthoconda. Had albino female, and she was really pretty, and I almost sold her, but I was like, I need to keep back more of these, and I didn't want to sell her kind of anyway because she was kind of a problematic feeder, and she wasn't too pretty. She was just real sporadic. She'd eat like twice a month, and if you gave her live, she'd eat, but then she was just a really defensive Hognose, so it was kind of tough to feed her because she was always in defense mode. She's just, every time you'd go in there, she'd just start hissing, flying around, musking, flopping on her back, spiraling, like, extremely defensive behavior. And after about 12, 14 months, she would calm down a little more, and now she eats very well, and now she doesn't even refuse a meal. So that's kind of the trick with some of them too, is just kind of sticking with it. And it's a small percentage that are like that, and it's definitely not a reason to get discouraged, because especially if you have multiples, just like all right, you find out that one's feeding habits, and they actually can fast for a long time. They're very good at keeping their body weight. Those problematic feeders, like the babies, you can always cool them. I've actually had that success with adults. I bought a lavender Hognose from this guy, a friend of mine, and for him, great feeder. Got into my setup, kept it exactly the same way pretty much. Don't know what it was. Didn't like my setup though, and my air temperatures, whatever, wouldn't eat. And wouldn't eat for months. And he was near breeding size, so I was like, I'm just going to cool. Brought him out of cool down, great feeder afterwards.
So when you're cooling down your Hognose, what temperature are you getting them down to?
Good question. It can vary. Because I have that question a lot. Like, what temperature do you cool them down to? And I think that one is extremely variable. Because again, for where Hognose come from, in the northern region, even in Texas, you look at Texas winters in like say the Lubbock area and even Midland. I mean, it could be like 70 degrees, and then that could be like 3 degrees, and it can be temperatures are like in the teens, and then it's like snowing and flurries, and then like a week later it's like 70 degrees, and maybe there's a tornado warning. And then like in their northern range, like the Dakotas and like Montana and Wyoming, everybody up there, they know those temperatures are wild. Nebraska, you can get those fronts moving in and out, and their lows in the winter up there, can be like negative 30 degrees and sometimes worse. But they'll go deep down into abandoned rodent burrows that they re-excavate out. And they've actually found that a lot of them hibernate together, that they'll sometimes be as many as 8 or 10 in the same spot. And they like to utilize the same rodent burrows. And it seems like those abandoned rodent burrows, too, that they use for hibernation and everything are the same exact ones that they'll continuously go to. So they kind of have their spots that they'll kind of co-hibernate in. And it's kind of seems similar to garter snakes. But with that being said, you go down deep into the ground, the average temperatures probably in the mid 50s. So I think the perfect cool down temp is anywhere between like 50 and like 62. And I've actually cooled them before where I've got them down into the high 30s. It's not necessary. It certainly isn't going to hurt your snakes as long as they're healthy. If you have a hognose that had some maybe issues with like respiratory issues or had any underlying health problems, I would do probably a more stable and shorter cool down period. But for a healthy hognose, I mean, you can cool them for long periods of time. I mean, in the wild, they'll go into hibernation and then go down to those, hibernaculums for 5-6 months sometimes, especially in the northern. Yeah, you're looking at more like probably 5 months for a lot of them. But I've cooled them as warm as like 65, 66 degrees, and I've had pretty good luck with that. And the key to also is keeping them dark during that time as well. So I just kind of keep them dark, make sure they stay hydrated. And I started cooling. The one thing I started doing, I want to start doing YouTube videos, and actually there's a lot of things to cover with Western hognose. It's like, well, you can hibernate them, but like, what do you hibernate them on? Most people hibernate them on aspen chips, and that's fine. But I like to do a mix of like coco coir and sand, and you can even sometimes incorporate builder clay if you have it. But just coco coir is good because you're keeping the soil kind of moist, and then that way, if you have them in the mid 50s and they're down in that moist soil that's not too wet, because you don't want like stopping wet. You want it kind of like potting soil dampness through. If you dug up and you went into some loose soil in the ground in the fall, foot down the ground, that kind of moisture. That's kind of the moisture level you want in your substrate. Because in the wild, when they're hibernating for 5-6 months, they're not drinking. They're down in that cool soil. Their metabolism's real slow, not losing much moisture through respiration because they're in a moist environment as it is. And they're almost kind of like in like a moist, loamy soil cocoon. And they're probably absorbing some liquid or some water through their skin, or at least not losing any. They're not able to lose any that way. And so I've actually hibernated them before, for 3 months, and I offer them water, and they're like not thirsty. But if you do them on aspen chips, you got to make sure they stay hydrated because it's dry, and you don't want moist aspen chips, obviously, because it's going to get pretty damn gross. Probably going to get mold in there and everything. Coco coir doesn't really mold; it has natural mold inhibitors, unless there's some type of like nitrator in there, something like snake shit. But you're not cooling them down in shit. You put them. You always put something brand new. Like when I cool them. I always make sure, for one, you got to make sure their stomachs are empty. Like they haven't eaten for about 3 weeks. And a lot of times I'll stage them. I'll kind of take them to an area where it's like slightly cooler and maybe cover them up, keep them slightly dark, and then kind of put them down to the full temperature. But I also don't see much of a problem kind of putting them right into full hibernation because like my friend Dan Eby, he lives in Montana, and we'll talk about the wild habits of like hognose, and he'll be like, yeah, man, I was out finding bull snakes in Western hognose, and it was like, it's like early October, and he's like, it's like 75 degrees. And then like 2 weeks later, it's like snowing and like 30 degrees with a low of 20. And that fall, weather's pretty much going right from fall to winter. Because that's the thing, where they come from, the fall, winter, it can happen pretty quickly. Yeah,
pretty quick transition for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're keeping them down for about 3 months, you said?
Yeah, like 3 months is good. Sometimes like more like 2.5 months is like more common for me, especially if you're like doing babies that you're trying to get feeding. It's not necessary to do a real extended period of time. I don't think they really have much concept of time because I've cooled them like a month and a half, 2 months with pretty good success. But you do want if you do them too short, there can be some lack of follow through. I found like people with briefs. I've heard people like, I cooled mine fully for like 5 weeks and I'm having this kind of issue. I'm like, 5 weeks is like not a really long period of time. And so for them, I mean, a hognose 5 weeks in the wild, I mean, they can get terrible crappy ass weather in April or May for a few weeks. So 5 weeks. So you really want to go at least like 2 months. When I've cooled babies to get them feeding, I found that even cooling them for like 3-4 weeks is good enough though. But when it comes to breeding and getting good fertility, it seems like you really want to go about 2 months.
Cool.
You can go longer too. You can go longer too, because I've actually cooled them as long as 5 months. And you don't really see any weight loss or any issues with that.
5 months. That's a long time. 5 months, man.
Yeah.
So a couple quick things before we jump on the next topic. First off, everything you just said, for somebody who doesn't know much about hognose, you just scared the shit out of him with this whole heat feeding. It's not that bad. You don't have that many animals that start out that badly. I mean, it's a very, very, very low percentage of babies that you get in trouble.
Right. Going back to the feeding, like the ones that the thing is, the 1 year I hatched out, like this past season wasn't my best season. The season before, though, I had like 1,200 babies. And when I went to hibernate the difficult feeders, for one, I have a lot of babies and a lot of things going on. So for the ones that are being extremely difficult for me, the ones that I'll cool to, stimulate the whole kind of spring, time progress and getting them to want to like naturally feed. It's a very small percentage. Ones where I go to cool them down, I'd say it's about 3% of my babies. And that was only the year I produced 1,200. This past year, with all these babies behind me, I didn't cool a single one actually.
Yeah. So in all honesty, I mean, when it comes down to this, and we only hear the horror stories online. Like nobody ever goes on Facebook and says, "Wow, what a great feeding hognose I have." It's when you have somebody having an issue that they're going to bring it up publicly, and a lot of that really comes down to the breeder. Somebody like Junior who's put in the time in, making sure the animal is well started, has a good feeding schedule, not just producing animals and sending them out to get money in. Hognose would be really great. And, Benjamin and Ryan, you're interesting, peaked in the beginning, and then he might have lost you a little bit there. But,
no, not at all.
With our hognose and the skinks and the corn snakes, they all have the same cool down schedule. They're all in the same room. They're all the exact same temperatures, and they all come up at the same time. So we get our about 2 months in with all three of those species. And we discussed last time, it's okay to work with a lot of different species as long as you have similar settings.
Yep.
So, having hognose in your skink room, let's say, is not a bad thing because they all can cycle the exact same time. The only thing that we found while doing this is when they all come out of cooling, where the skinks jump right into breeding, the hognose took at least a month to a month and a half after come out of cool down before we actually had good lots.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing, like what Dave was saying about like keeping like different species, like that's actually the cool thing about hognose. So I've actually had ball python breeders show interest in Western hognose, and they're like, "Well, I think my rooms might be too hot. Like my ambient temperature is like 83." I'm like, "Actually, that's good. That's not a problem." And the thing is, you can actually keep hognose too in rooms with cooler ambient temperatures. You just kind of have to adjust. And again, it's like when I said like sometimes you'll have babies go off feed, and it's because you're moving them to a completely new environment. And it's a small percentage again too. We're talking about the small percentage, like Dave said. Like, like this year so far, I've shipped from January till now. I don't even know how many. I mean, I've done a lot. I've probably shipped out over 100 Western hognose since then, and I've had practically zero complaints. And not even complaints. There's a few every now and then. I'll have people like, "Hey, he's missed a few feedings," and I'll give them like some tips and everything. And generally, they all go back to feeding. And then I'll get people that ask me questions too. Like I had a few people, they're like, "You want to buy hognose from me?" And I'm like, "Well, the cheapest ones I have right now are around $200." And then like 3 weeks later, like, "Hey, I bought this hognose from this guy, and I don't have his information. Won't eat for me. What do I do?" Okay. And so I'm like, "All right, well, these are some things to do." And I just kind of send them that information and give them the ideas. But yeah, like the one thing that people don't talk about with hognose is actually how good of feeders they are. Because again, once you get them feeding and they get the ball rolling, these things are extremely aggressive feeders and very consistent feeders. Like pretty much all these racks behind me, I only have the tagged colored ones that are kind of like the finicky feeders. And out of the 600, there's probably about 40. And the thing is, again, they can go a while without eating. So it's pretty easy to, work with them and not get like, if they don't eat for like 2 weeks, it's not an issue. It's like, okay, we got some time. And my dad bred corn snakes. I never really messed with corn snakes too much, but Dave bought parts of my dad's collection when my dad was getting out of breeding corn snakes. But my dad started breeding corn snakes around the time I was like 15. and he wanted like kind of a project that he did on his own because we bred geckos together. I did Hognose, that was all my stuff. And then he wanted to get into corn snakes, and he's seen some opportunity with like these pink snow corns. And there's this guy who was selling at the reptile show. Can't remember exactly who he was, but my dad got him and started line breeding them. And he had other morphs too, like the terrazzo corn snake, which was originally named Granite, but they called the Anery blood red Granite. So he actually changed the name because that gene almost got lost, and he's luckily able to acquire them. But he bred corns, and he would actually always say, he goes, man, I wish my baby corns would feed as good as your hognose snakes, because baby corns are, there's a percentage of them that are poor feeders. And hognose, again, once you get them feeding, I'd say about 90% of your babies are extremely strong feeders and are very easy to get them feeding. But so far, we've pretty much been just talking about more, difficult, like the kind of troubleshooting, your ones that are more finicky. But again, for me, it's a very small percentage. I'd say, right off the bat, 90% are pretty strong feeders. By the time they're all 4 or 5 months old, about 97, 98% of them are extremely good feeders, not giving me any issues.
So one last thing before we jump into the next topic. When are you going to change the battery in your fire alarm in your room? Because this beeping is driving me crazy, bro.
Yeah. That started happening 2 days ago, and it's kind of been my going to be my new incubator room. And there's no power or anything in there. And if there was ever a fire, I don't know why there'd ever be a fire in there. There's nothing in there that could.
That's your excuse for not changing it?
Yeah, it's been going for a past days. But see, the thing, I'm not really even over there. It's kind of through the other side door. I keep forgetting about it.
We're not.
Yeah, it's deafening.
Oh, man, is it that bad?
Absolutely deafening.
Is it that bad?
Oh, it's bad.
It must be-
half the time I'm just waiting to hear it again. I'm not even listening to you talk right now.
Really? You're just counting the beep?
No, I'm listening to you. That was a lie.
Yeah.
We're going to try to move it away from it then.
Yeah.
It'll help maybe slightly.
Yeah, we can only hope.
So when you're talking about that, about the feeding and things like that, it got me thinking about some other snakes that we have that are tricky eaters. An oddball maybe that we probably it's just something in my mind. I would love to try to scent some pinks for our anthills, the pygmy pythons.
Okay.
They don't eat. Normally in the wild they eat baby knobtail geckos, and
Okay.
we can't afford.
They have it like termite mounds, don't they?
Yeah. Yep. So we're they're really tricky to get started, and sometimes we have to force feed for a while. And Justin Julander is the pygmy python guy, and he's like, yeah, if you force feed, it should only be for a few months. And we force fed for 8 months, the last clutch that we had, and we're slowly getting better at it. But I think there's something to that. Maybe scenting, maybe scenting, like you're saying, with and braining the pinks.
You know what? Yeah, because my dad never really did anything like that. But every now and then, he'd go somewhere, he'd go on vacation for like a month, and be, hey, can you take care of my corn snakes? And usually his one friend would come over, he'd pay him, but I would help sometimes. And he had this one group of finicky feeders, and he's like, he goes, I forget what he said. He goes, those ones aren't going to eat. And I tried all my hognose tricks on them, and they pretty much all ate, every single one.
Wow.
So yeah, and corn snakes are actually lizard feeders in the wild. So very similar diet. And yeah, you're talking about your anthills being lizard feeders. Just because they're lizard feeders, kind of like hognose. Hognose actually will eat lizard eggs, and they're also lizard feeders as well. They found adults eating, horned toads. If they can get a hold of them, ground skinks, and stuff, they'll eat them. Typically, they're not getting a hold of them though because they're pretty quick. And hognose are kind of more clumsy, slower feeders, and they're usually using their rostral scale to dig up prey and all that. But I would actually try the sardine juice, even though it's not something they eat. And you could try the water trick too, because you put that up to the tip of their mouth and you get them to drink a little bit. Just take their water away for a little bit so they're a little thirsty. And that worked for my dad's corns really well. See, the reason it works real well for hognose is hognose aren't ambush predators. They kind of just dig up food, or they come across food. and they kind of pushed their face into it and they grab it. They use their rear fangs to hang onto it and subdue it. You know, then when they're eating like turtle eggs or lizard eggs, that ain't getting away. So that's pretty easy to eat. But, you know, definitely scenting something with like amphibians or even sardine juice might actually help. And it could actually stimulate their appetite.
Huh. We have a Mullendorfi, a 100-flower rat snake, one that's not eating well and not eating at all actually at the moment.
Yeah, it's being a pain in my behind.
So yeah, and those are also, I mean, they'll eat lizards, right? And
Will they? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know anything about them in the wild.
They're probably it seems like a lot of rat snakes are.
Yeah,
you know, like stuff like corn snakes and like black rats. I mean, they'll eat, you know, bird eggs. So, you know, black rat snake, I mean, even a big one, they'll show like a 6-footer going up into a tree and they'll raid, you know, like a nest and, you know, eat all the eggs, even though, I mean, eating like robin eggs for black rat, I mean, it doesn't seem like a large meal, but, you know, you go through and eat enough bird eggs, but, you know, and their diet goes pretty diverse, but, you know, that's the thing too with antlers. I mean, they're primarily eating lizards. So, I mean, it seems like any type of like lizard feeder definitely has some difficulty switching over to pinks. I mean, and seeing with hognose, they're typically amphibian feeders, and then also egg eaters and lizard eaters on the occasion. So just trying different scenting techniques and things that stimulate their appetite. I mean, sardine juice is such a strong, overpowering, like, you know, scent, you know, and taste. And, you know, that could possibly work on it.
right.
That is how you get tigers to eat your husband.
Wow.
Yeah, that's true.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sardine juice?
Oh, yeah. Although I use sardines in spring water, yeah. Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, Dave's seen that. I know Dave liked it. I was about to watch it, and my girlfriend was like, I don't know. And she's like, and I was like, oh, okay. Then Dave, like the day later, he's like, man, you gotta watch this show. It's called Tiger King. I was about to watch that. So then I put it on, and she was into it. And of course, I was too. I'm like, man, this is pretty fascinating stuff. Pretty interesting. And I could talk about that for hours. There was just so many aspects of that, and so many, you know, points of views from both sides, and I can see both. But yeah, it was pretty. The big cat. Because I actually had a couple people asked me, like, hey, do you know? I was like, I don't know that. I've never heard of him. I was like, there's really not much crossover with the big cat exotic keepers and reptile people. I mean, breeding hognose is pretty easy. And it's a pretty easy species to keep, and it's pretty easy to keep happy. You know, they just need shelter, water, you know, food, and, you know, good areas to burrow. Cats that could possibly maul you. Yeah, big difference.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, we tried talking about this with Bob last week, and we just didn't get a whole lot of Bob with that show. I'm not even convinced he really watched it. I think everything that he knew was based on what he saw on Facebook.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? He wouldn't come out and admit that he didn't watch it. He's just like kind of like one of those kids like in like at school, and they're like, hey, did you read the book? And he's like, yeah. And you're listening to the other kids. Because actually, I remember doing that. I didn't read the whole book, and the other kids, I did not do well in school. It was not my it wasn't my place for being educated. I educated myself on my own or when I got out of school. But I just listened to what they said about the book, and it could have been just kind of put together the pieces of the story, because they talk about the important facts, and they'd be like, well, why do you think this person did that? And I'm like, well, from what this kid said and based on logic, this is what they would do. And they're very good. That's what Bob probably did. Why? What was Bob saying? He just wasn't, or maybe wasn't.
Not a whole lot. That was the problem. I don't. It was not memorable. I don't remember a single thing about that conversation. Ben looked all excited about it, and Bob brought nothing to the table.
We tried to bring it up, and it was just like, I didn't watch it.
Yeah.
All
I
of
think
America
he said he watched it, but he just didn't seem like he was bullshitting.
Yeah.
Are you moving further away? It's not going to change it, Junior. You have to get in a whole other building for us not to hear that sound anymore.
Yeah, I wish I had like a foam board. If I went into the other room, I wish I would have known earlier. If I went into the other room, it'd probably be it'd be dulled out a lot more.
That's fine. Maybe there'll be a next time, just because I want to see if you change the battery out.
Okay. Probably just take it out.
Yeah, that's not very safe. You should just change the
that
battery.
room again, man. That room, there's nothing like all the smoke alarms. They have a purpose for pretty much every room in the whole facility. So for the incubator room, again, it's not even functioning right now. It hasn't been done. There's nothing in that room. There's like an electrical outlet. A fire could not start in there.
Do you need me to call your mom? I'm going to call your mom and tell her to come over and change the battery out.
You don't care. Unless somebody committed arson and threw like a Molotov cocktail and they knew right where my incubator room is, then I would not know until it spread to the other rooms.
So
good luck knowing which one's the incubator room, though. Very small. If you're trying to commit arson and you don't know the layout, it's going to be very difficult to find that room.
sounds like a bet. Let's find it. So you're doing this full time, right? This is your full time.
I do this full time. Geckos, Hognose snakes. Still breed a lot of leopard geckos. My dad and I bred leopard and fat-tailed geckos, and then we had our side projects. And I bred Hognose before I bred geckos, and he got out of it completely around like 7 years ago. He still had a few corn snakes for a little while afterwards. Then he parted with his corn snakes, and he kind of does his art and all that stuff. And I kind of just took the rest of the geckos and, continued on with that. And actually, I reduced on geckos for a little while, but I'm back up with producing a decent number of leopard and fat-tail geckos. But my prime interest in everything is Western Hognose, and that's where my main focus and most of my breeding is done with them. But leopard and fat-tail geckos, still love them, and they sell well and, everything, so I still work with them.
So, how old were you the last time you had a normal job? Or a non-reptilian full-time job?
20.
20?
And how old are you now?
Lucky man.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I just kind of like, the one thing that I think fuels a lot of reptile breeders is the passion and the species they like. And then also, especially when you're first in, you got to be frugal as hell. And that's what I was. You got to basically, that means living with your parents. And if you want to breed reptiles, do that. If you have to have like set up to impress people, or you want to be out on your own, you might have to wait a little while longer until you're ready to be a full-time reptile breeder, or you might still have to
31 years old or 32 years old?
30. 30 is the
30.
number. Well, you all know I have underlying health conditions, and actually, because I almost bought a place when I was 23, and that actually would have probably worked out. At the time, I didn't have really good credit built up. But this actually all came together pretty well. I almost bought a place almost 2 years ago, and this place ended up being really ideal. It's commercial and residential, so I cannot have anybody complain about what I'm doing here. And it's pretty much a really good setup for reptiles as far as having a bunch of different rooms and everything. It's got a pretty good layout, able to customize a lot of the stuff. And when you're breeding reptiles, you definitely got to put the reptiles before you and your comfortability. So again, like Dave said, if that means living in your house and being yelled at your parents until you're 31, that's the way to go. It's the way to go. You got to treat yourself like shit, and the reptiles like, number one. So
there's a lot of people in this hobby that have aspirations to do this full time. And you guys have both been doing this full time for a while now. You have any good tips for these guys to what they should maybe think about or do to kind of help them out?
Aside from living with their parents?
Aside from living with their parents?
Keep living costs low. Keep living costs low. And then also, I think a lot of people I've seen, or Dave might agree with this too. I'll have his input afterwards. But just the fear of having to go back to a normal job to be the driving motivation to get all of your stuff done and to be responding to customers all the time. And just having that nagging fear that you might fall into the pit of having to go back to doing drywall finishing and, just being in a despair of having to go back to that old lifestyle.
I like that. That's a good tip.
Yeah, fear. It's all fear driven.
It's all fear. Yeah, it's all fear. Find some coworkers that you really hated or a boss, or even the work environment, and just take pictures of that and put that on your wall and have that every morning.
Right on. Reverse inspirational posters. I'm in.
Yeah, reverse inspiration, and then have a list of things you got to get done, with your reptiles and everything. But the big thing too is patience. You got to be very patient, because there really isn't a quick species where it's going to be all of a sudden you're going to be full time. That's the one thing I get people like, oh, can I do this full time? And it's kind of a question I don't really like, because I kind of want people to be long-term hobbyists and kind of grow, and then you grow into that and you get that idea on your own right away. definitely don't want to be that. The first motivation to want to get into reptiles is like, okay, this is my key focus is to be full time, because like any full time job or any full time like business hobby combination, you're gonna have a lot of other people that want to do that, and there's competition, and it could be a drive for. I mean, it hurt the leopard gecko market for a good bit. I know in like the later 2000s, there was so many new leopard gecko breeders coming up because it's pretty easy to have fast turnover. You have females that are 10, 12 months old, 14 months old that will lay, 10, 20 eggs sometimes a season. You have really good diet and you have a real, productive female. She might lay 10 sets of 2 eggs, so you might get 20 eggs. And there was so many. I remember on gecko forums there was ads for breeders, and there was that big boom in Europe and interest in like started picking up in Hong Kong. With people wanting to get a leopard geckos because of all the new morphs that were on the market in like the mid 2000s. So this is more around like 2005, 2006, and the market was very strong. And then around 2007, 2008, there were so many people that were buying these things, and then they were breeding leopard geckos for like a year and a half, and they'd have a website already, and they'd be having a bunch of leopard geckos posted for sale. And it wasn't too hard to adapt to that because it did hurt sales a little bit. But we just did so many reptile shows, and you do wholesale orders, and then your sales online, and there's just so many things you're running around doing. And that's the thing about leopard geckos too, doing those kind of full time. That's a job in itself. Just to sit, you got to be out there, kind of marketing, putting things on different classifieds, going to post on forums. Morph market wasn't around then, but doing things like King Snake, and then having a website, and then just doing shows constantly.
So I wish we had more time, by the way. We're going down like the last 8, 9, 10 minutes of this. But
we can go as long as you want, really.
We might have to go a little bit longer on this until.
I think I feel like I ruined it by talking about species I don't work with for a whole hour. I'm probably just getting with this now. But even at the beginning, I'm like, man, I'm not speaking as articulately as I typically do. Probably a little nervous because it's a podcast and everything, but now I'm more comfortable, and we can stop talking about bones, pythons, and other stuff.
Again, I honestly think that bones conversation was one of the highlights. Not to be rude, because I love everything you always say, but I really thoroughly enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think it's a good conversation. I just kind of feel like I don't really have much of a position to talk about the species I haven't worked with.
That was probably the best conversation I've ever had on the species between the 4 of us talking.
We have 4 of the top minds in the industry right now talking about the species.
Yeah, something like that. What do we say about this show? No fucking egos.
He was talking about me. I mean, that's top mind.
So talking a couple numbers, and then we have to talk at least a little bit about fat tails. Your best year breeding leopard geckos, how many babies did you guys have?
Oh man, yeah, okay, that's like one of my, that's one actually kind of closer to the end. My dad would get he goes, we breeded this many again. I don't want to do this shit. This is horrible. Because I was kind of like, the general, kind of like the breeding force. We'd go back and forth. What should we breed together? But ultimately, in the end, he'd be like, you pick most of the projects and things we should do. And I'd be like, we should keep this back and everything. And I always was aspiring to grow more and more. And it did get to the point where it's like, all right, you kind of capped out. You need to knock it off. And that was like around 5,000. We produced 5,000 in a year. But actually, I had a lot of repeat customers and people that would want to buy 100 to 200 at a time to resell and stuff. And sometimes I'd sell to pet stores. And we did a lot of reptile shows. I mean, back then, we did so many shows. We would do the most we did, and this is with local shows too. So if you count those, but we want to do the Cleveland show in the summer. So we would do about 9 or 10 of those a year. And then we do sometimes a Columbus show. We would do sometimes a show. We do Tinley, obviously. When NARBC had the Philadelphia show, we did that. And then we do Hamburg. We do Daytona. Sometimes I go out to Texas by myself. And then sometimes my dad would go to California, or I go to Pomona. We didn't do those too often. And we do shows in Tennessee, we didn't do Tennessee. We did North Carolina, South Carolina, and we did a couple others. But we do sometimes up to 32 shows a year.
Wow.
And that's the thing with leopard geckos. It's you have a lot of them. You have to be doing a lot of online sales, and it's a lot of work because leopard geckos are easy to produce. Now the hard part is making that profitable, and then also selling to, you know, responsible like keepers and everything, and you know, making sure you have like, you know, enough room to put all this stuff. And, you know, so it's very difficult because, you know, you gotta have the rack set up, very large insect bill. You know, you're looking at like $35,000 a year to feed all these when we're up to that many. But, you know, typically we're producing more around like 2,500. And that was a more comfortable number.
Okay. There's what else I want to say. And like, you know, that 32 number you said, it sounds like a really scary number, but it's not really 32 weekends on the road because like you said, the Cleveland and Columbus show is the same weekend. So 10 of those weekends you're doing 2 shows at a time.
Right. I'm actually talking about doing a lot of shows. I'm talking to the show king right here. Dave does a lot of shows and he's traveling a lot more. My strategy for doing shows was doing as many shows back then that were pretty close. Dave does a lot of shows, and you do shows that are like relatively close, but you definitely don't mind trekking pretty far. Like you're always going to different spots.
An extra 4 or 5 hours in the car doesn't seem like that big of a deal, honestly. I mean, you're really only talking like an extra tank of gas maybe, and you know, your expenses aren't that much more to drive an extra 4 or 5 hours if the show's going to be good. So you're right. You know, we put miles in over the years, and you put in a lot, but you know, it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, then we also did the ham show too. Because when we did the ham show, we wouldn't only deliver animals; we'd actually vend the show too, set up a table.
So when you do the overseas shows, I mean, is it less talk behind the table? Is it more people coming over and just pointing at an animal and taking it, or how does that work?
In Japan, yes, Japan was actually awesome. There is this. He's like almost 20 now, and I haven't talked to him too much recently. But his name is Yutaro, and this kid was cool. He was like, I don't know at the time, he may have been like 9 or 10. Maybe he was a little older. But he actually, I think he lived in London for like a few years, but he spoke perfect English and also Japanese. And then it's funny, I was asking him, I was like, are you going to learn it? He goes, yeah, I'm actually going to learn French. And he goes, because he said even in school in Japan, he goes, you got to take a language class. And he goes, you could choose English. He goes, even choose Japanese, I guess, to get like, you know, further in depth of like learning all the characters and everything. And he goes, oh, I chose French because that's a common language along across the you know, world. And he would help translate for me, and it was awesome because I'd be like, tell this person this, you know, joke around with them. And so his Japanese was like spot on, and so same with his English. His English, like if you talk to him, you thought he was from the United States. And but before then, every now and then, I'd have to ask a friend to come over, and I'd be, hey, can you help translate this real quick? But yeah, you had a lot less talk because yeah, a lot of Japanese people understand English fairly well, but more in writing because they learn it like in high school. I think they take some courses. So reading English, they're pretty much all very capable of doing that. A lot of Japanese people understand a very small amount of English, and it seemed like maybe 10% or less spoke pretty good English. So a lot of them would be just kind of like look at stuff, and every now and then they kind of like hand motion, like do a little lower on price, and they'd ask some questions if they, you know, knew the right words and everything, and then I try to explain. And if they really needed a translator, I'd have somebody come over. But overall, yeah, there wasn't as much talk. There was more people that, you know, just handing me money for animals and stuff. And then people over there speak English. But yeah, a lot of countries too. You had people coming from like, you know, France, Italy, you know, over from Belgium and, you know, Poland, and but you know, most of the people spoke pretty decent English, or enough to do a degree where you could carry out a simple conversation.
Cool. Well, should we keep it simple until Ryan comes back? I mean,
no, I want him to miss everything.
Okay, good.
Serves him right.
Yeah, right. You got anything, Ben, you want to throw out, or you want to just jump right into fat tail geckos? Where do you want to be?
Well, there was a couple things. I have one thing that I want to close out with, but I had one more thing. I'm just starting to lose it. We can get into fat tails though as well. I know there's one thing that I do want to talk about as a closeout, but I'll save that one. So we can get into fat tails. Yeah.
Not like last time where you had your closeout. I think you asked a closeout question around like hour 1 of the interview. For some reason, I remember right.
Yeah, you know, the first time jitters of us, you know, working together. I guess I don't know, but
I get it. Bob's gorgeous. I was jittery the whole time myself.
Yeah, it's funny. But
But,
yeah, no, we can get into fat tails. The one, so there is one question I guess I now remember was it's probably good to talk about. We're still on leopard geckos. How many things are you known for bringing to the market? Or I know that you've imported things as well, and maybe that you were like, I don't know if I don't know how many things you're maybe the first person to have, or the real driver of things. How many things? Because I think sometimes people watch this and they're like, oh, like I've heard of Jeff and them, but I don't really know a lot. I want people to see a perspective of exactly how big of an influence you are and how big of a name you are actually in the leopard and hognose world. I mean, even though you're young, you're still like, you're a big deal. You've been in this for a long time, 18 years or more. And I mean, so can you just real quick talk about, even with the hognose and the leopard gecko, what you've brought in to this market that people are like, oh man, like, and you can even mention that during that one Tinley auction, was it 2 years ago or October 2 years ago? And wait, I
don't know if we're allowed to talk about this, Gene.
All right, never mind.
We could talk about it. But yeah, with the hognose, I'm the originator of Arctic, Lemon Ghost, and Woma. And the Woma came from my Lemon Ghost projects, though. I started getting Lemon Ghost that had these kind of like triangle, almost like kind of sometimes tiger striping by their neck. And I started line breeding that. And so I originated Woma, Lemon Ghost, and actually I have pretty cool Woma stuff. I just don't really share it unless somebody's, wanting to buy it. But I'm doing more stuff with that people will probably see in a few years. But then Arctics. So those three traits with hognose. I've also developed my own line of red phase, but I never really market it or even tell people. People kind of know it's like my line, but I've outcrossed it into other red lines too. And I've been working on that since the time I was 15. So I kind of have my own red phase lineage too. But the main morph that kind of really, originated in hognose, of course, the Arctic, Lemon Ghost, and Woma. Leopard geckos, I did all that with my dad, so that's kind of like like a joint effort. Some people might want to give him a little more credit for a lot of it because when I was young, obviously I wasn't the main investor in all this. When I was 12 and 13 years old, I wasn't balling with all kinds of money. And that's kind of how we got into leopard geckos. I was going to shows and I was talking about breeding more and more. And, then my dad just kind of watched me struggle, try to talk to these people to try to buy leopard geckos with my measly $50. And so then when we started getting leopard geckos, I remember, I think it was Robbie Hampers at the Hampers table. They had some high yellow leopard geckos, and they were really interesting looking high yellow leopard geckos, these big, bold, black blotchy. They kind of had this lime greenish look. And they came from originally Gourmet Rodent, and they were reselling them or breeding them from ones they got from them. And I told my dad, I really want to get these. And so we bought those. And it's funny, I've never seen those again, anything like that. And that was actually the founding stock for Hyperxanthics. And we line bred Hyperxanthics for about a decade until we got the look that we were kind of going for. And it was probably about 7 or 8 years when we kind of came out. But it was probably a full decade before they kind of really achieved this unique look that was extremely different from anything else in the leopard gecko hobby. So we're known for Hyperxanthics. And actually, that's one we're probably the least known for. And if for some reason, that's a really underappreciated line bred trait. And it's actually extremely powerful, similar to that of Black Knight with the way it reacts and how strong. Because you can take a Hyperxanthic and you can breed it to something. First generation, you're seeing a lot of Hyperxanthic in there and a lot of Hyperxanthic characteristics. And that can't be said for most line bred leopard gecko traits. Most line bred leopard gecko traits, you outbreed them to something completely different. A lot of that's lost first generation. And then we're known for blood hypos, our own lineage of tangerine. And that started from, actually at the time, most people were going for super hypo tangerines. Least amount of spots, brightest coloration, bright yellow, bright oranges, and the most carrot tail. And we kind of seen everybody else was doing this. And we're like, well, let's try to get as dark red as we can because red's cool, dark orange is cool. And we found the ones that had more spots, which makes sense because they're producing more pigmentation, or the better source to go to line breeding a darker pigmented animal and not line breeding out the spots because you're line breeding out a lot of pigmentation while doing that. And so our hypo lineage, we went towards producing a dirtier, darker colored, more spotted animal. And so we originated bloods. And then we had some other morphs that we created before other people did. like radars. Then that was one that I really wanted to produce because Raptor is actually kind of an acronym. It's not a full acronym because the OR is for orange, and that's not exactly how acronyms work, but it's close because you got Raptor. It's a red-eyed, albino, patternless, tremper, orange. And that's the thing is with Raptors, though, they don't have to really be patternless. People call them band Raptors, but it's all line bred. It's all line bred, except for the Eclipse and the Tremper albino there. So everything aside from that's just line bred. So it's kind of just like, if you have a Raptor that has a reverse stripe or a banded, it's still a Raptor. It's not a Raptor because it doesn't have the P, the patternless in it. But radar, where like everybody's expecting an acronym. So we made the Eclipse Bell albino, and so the Bell albino is a different strain of different, completely incompatible line of albino, and we put Eclipse into that. And we really wanted to make sure there's no tremper in it, though, because that's the thing. Leopard gecko people are very analytical about that stuff, and they really don't want albino lines mixed together to avoid confusion when you're working on your projects. And so I wanted something that sounded close to Raptor, but you also get some people like, "What's the acronym?" You could ask. I was like, "I don't know." I couldn't think of an acronym that would sound cool and make sense. I was like, they got all red eyes, radar seems makes sense, and so aside from that, we had lavender stripes. And that one's kind of like, we kind of had our own lavender stripe line. That one I wouldn't say is like anything like a real big accomplishment, but we actually did line breed for quite a while. And actually that project, I kind of lost that one, but actually Steve Sykes still has stuff from original pure lavender stripes I bred, and he's still keeping that going. And they look pretty good. And if you look at them, it's like, okay, that's definitely a different polygenetic from anything else that's out there. And I'm trying to think if we did anything else. I know we did other stuff with combination of leopard geckos, but trying to think of actual leopard geckos that are distinctive ones we made. But I'll just move on to fat tails. We're originators of the whiteout gene. It's an incomplete dominant gene. The homozygous, unfortunately, is lethal. There's no problem with the single incomplete, one copy gene carrier whiteouts. Whiteouts are extremely strong, and they have absolutely zero issues. But the homozygous form is like kind of like a pinto, like pied looking horse, like if like the pinto pied horses. I think that's what they're called. But they're like all white with like little blotches, and sometimes they'll be like pure white with like just a blue blotch in their head, or just like a couple little panda blotches. And they just die full term in egg. A lot of times their organs are outside, so we don't obviously breed whiteout to whiteout. And we're also the first people with patternless. We bred the pattern straight, although Craig Stewart got a bigger grouping of wild caughts and kind of lead us to the production on them. And yeah, so we do, well, it doesn't really matter. It's like, well, who imported what? There's other, ones that came in imported. But so yeah, we're kind of known just for whiteouts, and we're then doing fat tail combinations. First ones to make like whiteout Oreos, whiteout Zulus, whiteout Zulu caramels, Oreo patternless, whiteout Oreo patternless, a lot of combinations. So we're kind of on the forefront of producing fat tails. Now like another good fat tail gecko breeder that's actually doing a lot of stuff with fat tails is Jessica from Gecko Babies, and she's actually got a lot of cool stuff now. Because I still breed quite a few fat tails. I have like whiteout Zulus, a lot of whiteout combinations, whiteout Oreos. I got a couple other interesting projects I'm working on that hopefully they come to fruition in a few years. And also we forgot we originated granite fat tails and also zero fat tails and stinger fat tails, which are all line bred. So we originated those three, and as well as our own line of Aberrants.
All right, so I was just doing a quick math on that. So that was like 4 hognose or so, about 5 leopard gecko, and 6 is just what you mentioned from the fat tails. That's 15 things, 15 lines of animals that you guys like originated. I mean, yeah. I can't even get one, and most people listening will be like, oh man, yeah, like we're doing good. 15.
It's pretty impressive.
They have their own lines of for their corn snakes too with his father.
My dad. Yeah, see, I can't take any credit for that. That's like all my dad. Yeah, my dad did the salmon, snow, and ghost corns, and he actually reinvigorated the whole terrazzo gene, because that's completely lost.
Wow.
Without my dad, there would be no terrazzo corn snakes right now.
Wow,
that's pretty awesome.
See, and so I just want people to see, if you're listening and you made it through the 2 hours so far, if you're listening, just realize what we're talking about here and who we're talking to. I mean, it's just impressive. So, yeah. Dave, you can go on. My last thing, I can close with is on the fun side.
I don't know. Can we see a really nice lemon ghost? Doesn't have to be the best, but I've always really loved your lemon ghost stuff.
Yeah, I got one over here that luckily just shed out. 'Cause, you know, when they're younger, they're not the best looking.
You got an older one?
They take a while to color up. Well, I got one that shed out, and it's actually from a really good bloodline, and it actually just shows you kind of the power of the lemon ghost, because this isn't even a 100% pure lemon ghost. This is a lemon ghost, and it's actually pos het for something, and it's a project I'm working on. And I took a lemon ghost that was one of my best lemon ghosts, bred it to this trait, and I made lemon ghost crosses het for this trait, and I bred one of those now back to one of my best lemon ghosts. So this is 75% high quality lemon ghost lineage and 50% pos het for another trait, and it's like neon yellow, pretty much. I don't know if it'll show on the camera.
It's a very tough color to pick up. Even I was, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it looks good. Some of the other, well, you have some really good pictures too, and you know when Ben goes to do some editing, I know we're gonna put some pictures next to you as you're talking, but yeah, there were some of those that I remember back in the day were just absolutely like neon. And that is a great looking animal.
Well, yeah, she's actually very yellow. Probably isn't showing up on the video camera that well.
Not too bad with the contrast of the white glove.
Yeah.
Got some black gloves? Maybe black gloves look better. Put your black gloves on.
Nah, I don't think it's a difference.
You can't buy gloves right now. Don't do this to them.
You don't wear gloves during a pandemic.
So nice.
But yeah, she'll be a lot more yellow. So basically, even what you're seeing, even though it's not the full range, what you're seeing is she's going to probably increase by, I'd say, about triple this by the time she's an adult. Wow. And so I still have.
Can you give the public what they want and show one that's got a little more age on it? Get some of that more dense coloration in the scales.
I don't have any here, man. They're on the other side of the building. I think I might have one, maybe, but most of the ones are at my other place currently.
We can wait.
No, that's fine. That's fine. We're just going to go ahead and call the interview now when it's at an all-time low.
Can you tell everybody how much one of those is worth?
Well, it varies. A really high quality lemon ghost. Here's the thing: I've seen people sell lemon ghosts for like $200, and you know they might be okay, they might be nice, but they're out crosses. They're not full lemon ghosts. Like a really, really high quality lemon ghost that's like neon yellow from like my best lineage, so like ones from like, you know, my projects I've been line breeding for like, you know, basically 20 years. Those nicest ones are going to be more around like $700 to $1,000.
Okay.
And when you're talking about the more rare hognose stuff, like the super arctic and leucistic, like what's the top end of the hognose market?
Right now it would be like leucistics. They're sitting around like $7-8 grand right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hognose.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Super Arctics. I mean, the Super Arctics has been out for a little while. I started releasing my first ones around like 2014, and the Arctics. I wasn't selling Super Arctics right away. But Super Arctics, when I first started releasing them, I think I was putting them around like 5, 6, 7 grand in that range. If they're like, I released like one yearling male and I had them at like 7,500, and then I had like baby females for around like 5 grand, 5,500, and some around like 6 grand. I can't remember exactly for some reason. But now, like a regular Super Arctic, I mean, they held the price really well. I mean, it's a really striking trait. It's extremely cool. It's going to look good in any combination of any, hognose morph. So it's one of the most important hognose genes to have, in my opinion. And a regular Super Arctic still goes for around $900 to $1,000, as a baby.
Not bad.
Yeah. Nice. So now, just because the wow factor, when the leucistic hognose first became available, some of the early buyers, what did they put into that project?
Before they were confiscated, like way back then, if you're talking about those were like 10 grand each. And then even when they released them, just more recently from the people that bought the collections from the zoos and were breeding them, some of those guys were offering it wasn't like a full release where it's like, okay, we're doing a full public release. We got like 10 or 20 for sale. They're like, oh, I'll sell 1 or 2. And they were asking like 15, 20 grand for those. So, I mean, you could have bought a leucistic like 4 years ago, probably, if you nagged the right person long enough and you had like $20,000.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. Some of the markets and, just the fluctuation over the years and, we discussed the skink market 10 years ago compared to the market now, and I was even talking to somebody about gargoyle geckos the other day, and they were talking about some of the red lineage gargoyles that are selling for like $2,500 nowadays. And
Wow.
God, I remember gargoyle geckos being next to nothing, and I know they've kind of come a long way, but you just never really know with certain species when they're gonna really peak, I guess you could say.
Yep. Well, gargoyles were really expensive when they first came out, and then when people started line breeding, having the really red ones, they went up in value. And I want to say even when I was in my late teens, they were expensive. Like really red ones were like $600-700. They were popular. They were actually not cheap at all. And then like Dave said, then they kind of took a downturn. Then around like 2010, I remember seeing people selling babies for like $30 each, like just sort of like regular reticulated, pattern, like, gargoyles, and just like kind of like typical looking gargoyles, or like low, like red striped ones for like $30, $40, $50. And they were actually fairly cheap for a little while. And even the really high red ones and the real nice red and white, red, black, like reticulated ones kind of fell in popularity. I don't know what the real nice ones fell down to. They were always kind of a little more expensive, but the popularity was kind of definitely on the downturn. And then in the last 3-4 years, it's really picked up again. Because like 4 years ago, I was able to get decent sized gargoyles, nice reticulated, some nice like low grade red stripe ones for like $75 each, like 3, 5, 6 months old animals wholesale. If I need, like somebody was like, hey, I need an export, can you help me find gargoyles? Sure. But now I'm like, if anybody's like, can you help me find gargoyles? I'm like, no, I don't even want to even ask. That's not going to happen. Like I see the prices people are paying, it's like insane. And I did a shipment actually for somebody a year ago, a little over a year ago, and they bought a bunch of gargoyles, and they're like, we're going to have them include them in your export. And I'm like, sure. And there was some like crazy red ones, and yeah, they were like $800 to $1,500 each, and white and red, awesome stripes. And man, these things are good looking, and it's really cool to see people are appreciating, all the time and effort that they're putting into line breeding, getting those colors out of them once again.
The markets are really cyclical, yeah. Like even with skinks, like you could buy them for like $50 a piece, and then it was like up, down, up, down. Now it's up again. Maybe it's a little bit down. Who knows? But
yeah, there's usually
what you're passionate about.
Yeah, it's like, well, it's kind of like when you look at like blue tongue skinks and you look at the size of them, what it takes to breed one, the amount of babies they're having, and it's like, yeah, when people are selling for like $75 and $100 each, it's like, that's a species that should be going for more than that. But the interest wasn't quite there on the scale. The demand wasn't quite strong enough. And now the demand's finally caught up to the, logical, point where it should be. Kind of with like hognose snakes too, because when hognose snakes were being produced a little more, and they weren't as mainstream in the hobby, you'd sometimes be able to find a Western hognose for $45 and $50 and $60. And I still, every now and then I'll get people that complain like, oh, these things used to be like $50, $60. I'm like, yeah, but when you're selling them for $50 and $60, that person really isn't getting paid much for their time or effort and energy that they're putting into that animal. And even though they're doing it as a hobby and income might not be, the sole purpose, especially for me, when I first started bringing hognose, income was like not even in my mind actually. When I first started with all this stuff, I was kind of under the impression back then you could not do this for a living. And I was actually told by a bunch of people that you cannot do this for a living. And that didn't really dissuade me because I didn't really care. And I was like, I was kind of like, well, maybe I will be able to use hognose as a supplement income. If I produce enough of them, selling for like $50, each and everything. But with inflation and everything, and then the interest in hognose going up, things kind of leveled off more now, kind of more, it's a little more reasonable for the time and effort you put into them in reflection to the price of the animal. Because like normal hognose now around like $100, and what it takes to breed a hognose, raise them up, and and all the time and effort and food you're putting into them, that's probably where it should be, where the person's getting paid a reasonable amount for their time, effort, and energy. And not all of your effort and energy is in that too. I mean, it's like talking like customer relations too. I mean, I'm spending hours a day, talking to people and helping people, whether they bought from me or didn't buy from me, with questions that they may have.
I agree with all that.
Yep.
Okay, we peaked. That's it.
All right. Is it my turn?
Oh, yeah. You
My
go
one
right
last-
ahead, man. Close it out.
All right. Well, my one last thing, maybe if you can just say, like, all right, so Dave gave me a little insight, and just a side note, let's just point out, Dave, your shirt is like neon bright right now. The way that it looks, it's awesome looking. You're like you look like you're going to an 80s disco. It's great.
Yeah, anything to take the focus off of this is really what I'm going for.
All right, so Jeff, I heard that you're a big prankster.
Yeah,
You love pranks. So can you tell us like maybe one or two stories of some really memorable pranks that you've done?
Yeah, we already know where Dave knows where this one's going. One of the most memorable prank was Dave was doing a reptile show, and he came and picked up some animals from me as well to sell and commission and everything. And he left us. He's like, I need more room. I was like, well, you can take my SUV and leave your car here. He's like, okay. And so he left his car there, and I was like, it'd be funny. And even though it's not funny, I'm going to tell Dave I got into a bad car wreck with his car. But because he had the keys, I was like, I'm not going to drive the car. He's like, take it, man. I don't care. And I think he even said to joke something. He goes, you crash it. I don't care, man. It doesn't matter. He goes, Dave's very easygoing. And, so I looked up pictures of his make and model and for car crashes. And I came across, fortunately, the best possible one. It was like the most bizarre looking accident. It was from like a semi tire flew off or another car tire from an oncoming lane, and it hit this guy's hood and windshield and kind of like smushed it like almost like a hot dog bun in the center, and blew out the windshield and it skipped off the car. And so I messaged Dave like, hey man, as I took your car out, but I had a little bit of a fender bender with it. I was like, the car's drivable. I was like, but they're coming to get on a flatbed and tow it. I was like, it's kind of messed up. And so I cropped out just underneath the license plate, which should have been a little suspicious. And I think Dave was a little suspicious, but he kind of just like, so I took a picture of it, and I was like, yeah, I was on a highway, like just out 5 miles from my house, dude. And Dave goes, holy shit, man. He goes, how are you alive? And I was like, well, hit at this angle and everything. And actually, I read up the story. The person that got in an accident, they actually had a passenger, and the passenger just got glass thrown in their arm, and they said they, just had to go to the hospital. But other than that, there was no injuries. They just had minor glass shards sprayed into their arm. And so it was a very survivable crash because both passenger and driver survived.
You did a lot of research for this.
Yeah.
I told Dave, I told Dave, I was like, yeah, I just drove it back to my house and everything. And Dave's like, oh, fuck, man. And he's like, that's my wife's car and everything. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, dude. And I kind of wanted to keep the prank going. And so I just didn't break it to him. And then Dave was like, man, I'm going to have to call and tell my wife. And I'm like, oh, shoot. Because I was about to tell Dave then that, like, hey, man, I'm joking. And then person with Tim Kupinoff was like, here he goes, don't even tell her, Dave. And Dave's like, yeah, I won't tell her until I get back. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. I keep this prank going until Dave gets back then. And then Dave messaged me. He goes, hey, can I get a police report? Because you said you did a police report. And I'm like, oh, shit. And so to keep the prank going, so I Googled a police report. And they have police reports, but it says copy only across it and everything. And so I was like, you know what? The copy across it is kind of like vague. And I was like, when somebody's reading the report, if I send it to them, they're probably not going to pay attention to that and think it's an actual copy. So I printed that out and I filled it out as best as I could. And I sent that to Dave. I was like, here's the police report. And then actually, I got kind of yelled at for that because Dave's like, he goes, I was like, well, it wasn't my fault, Dave. I was like, you asked for the police report. I was like, that was not part of the prank until you asked for it. I was like, I wasn't even going to do that. And so he sent that to his wife. And I guess I was back at home taking care of snakes, not thinking anything of it. Here, his wife's having a crisis, his wife at the time and everything was having a crisis over calling their insurance agency and giving them the details from this police report that I made up. And she called me up, and she was all, and I told her, I was like, oh, it's a prank. And she was really livid. She was extremely angry, wanted to kill me. Dave thought it was funny, and he wasn't too upset because he wasn't in much trouble. I was really the person that was and yeah, it was pretty bad. And then Dave retaliated pretty good. It was like good because he didn't like strike immediately. And so it was like about a year later, go to Tinley and everything, and I go up to it. Dave somehow convinced them, which is kind of scary, to give him my card key to get up to my room, and he hid everything in my room. And when I went back up there, I was like, all my shit's gone. And even Andrew, my friend's stuff is gone. He goes, my stuff's gone too. Wow. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I was like, my bed was like clean and everything. And I was like, somebody stole all my shit. Dave said he wanted to make it look like they cleaned the room and just removed all my stuff. Actually, I thought somebody went in there and just stole my shit. And so I was getting pretty pissed and, swearing and like, getting mad at Andrew's like, he goes, you're getting too pissed off. I'm like, no, this is fucking stupid. And so then my friend Corey was in there. He goes, well, did you check the cabinets? I was like, why would anybody check the cabinets, you idiot? I was like, my shit's gone. Why would it be in there? So Corey opens the cabinets and all my stuff's in there. And so I'm like, oh, it is in there. And then I get a 4-pack of Red Bull, and I'm like, oh, that's Dave's stuff because he's always mixing Red Bulls with this drinks. So then I knew Dave was behind it.
Yeah, so things he left out though. So with Jackie, the ex-wife, so she cried, and not like a little bit. She cried a lot. She really loved this car. And then on top of that, she did call the insurance company about this, and on the policy, objects flying off of other cars and hitting your car was not covered in the policy. So at that point, she thought the car was gone forever and didn't have a car anymore and wasn't going to get covered.
Wow.
And there might have been more crying because of that. So he really broke her brain that day, like really fucked her up.
Well, on my side, I didn't even know that she was being informed of all of this. But the one thing that I would point out, this is a really big positive and a takeaway, you found out on your insurance coverage that flying objects weren't covered. And actually, there's a lot of things that can fly off of other cars. So that kind of puts in perspective, like, all right, now you know maybe you should go with different insurance.
He was helping you out, for sure.
Was the loan?
I got you, man.
Thank you again. It was good. There's been some other ones over the years, but yeah, those were 2 really solid pranks now that I remember.
That was a good prank because it's like, it wasn't supposed to be mean-spirited. I guess it kind of ended up in that way on Jackie's end. Unfortunately, that was kind of just like severe collateral damage that wasn't foreseeable.
It's the reason she's the ex-wife.
No, that was my fault. It wasn't the car accident.
I think actually
the false car accident.
I understand more of that because I know Dave on a personal level. It was like a lot of the driving force is actually his mustache and his reluctancy to cut it was actually, I know, maybe a little bit of a reason. Was that any reason, Dave?
I mean, it definitely came up. She definitely hated the mustache. But, and I kind of said this too, and I do feel bad still, but if she couldn't handle that, there was a lot more that she wouldn't be able to handle. So, it is what it is. But, the pranks. So Benjamin might want to start doing some pranks, and I said maybe we could bring you on as our full-time prankster.
Yeah, I have some pretty good ideas. There's one that I like to do.
Hey! You don't talk about your pranks ahead of time.
I don't want to say, but it's a pretty good one. It's a pretty decent one.
We're only 2 episodes in, but there's a chance that person might be listening. So
I think it'd be fun to have you on.
Is it me?
I think it'd be fun to have you on. Like, oh, and now we're gonna call in Jeff real quick and update us on this prank, and then you'll like do the prank or whatever, explain the prank of what happened, and it would have to be to somebody that maybe us and Dave or you and Dave can discuss. Of
now Junior with the weather.
Now Junior with the weather, but really it's with the prank. And
we set the bar really high for you though, but if there's no tears, you failed.
I don't know. I don't know if that's the main objective of most pranks.
Let's see. Maybe
you do like to carry them pretty far though, because you don't want to immediately because I'd watch some pranksters on YouTube and I'm like, that person had a pretty good idea, but the execution was like they folded too quickly. It's like so many people that get like the police involved, and it's like as long as it's not you're getting arrested right away and it's not going to implicate you further, just probably keep it as long going as possible. Even if you get a bad reaction from a police officer, because the thing you're looking for is a reaction and everything. Yeah. And so you kind of have to like not care. And that's one thing I'm kind of glad I got away from doing pranks still a little bit, because some of the stuff I was kind of doing was like, you could actually get you in trouble, even though it's just a total prank and you have all the evidence. You could actually get because one of my favorite pranks I seen was these guys. It was awesome. They bought an old ATM machine and they filled it with fake money. And they threw it on the side of the street and they'd pull up in a black SUV and masks with like baseball bats and stuff, break into their own ATM and be taking fake money out of it in front of a bunch of people. And the reaction they're getting, and it was so much funnier. It wasn't almost such the people, just the whole act. Like these guys bought their own ATM machine, filled it with fake cash, are going up there and like, very believably smashing into it, have bags, pulling all the money out. Then one, they had a chain where they wrapped it around it and dragged it off. And then they had people around, some people would scream and run. some people. One guy was like calling the police and like trying to follow them. And then like somebody, like a couple people, like after they took off, it's dark out. They couldn't tell that it was fake money, and then they're taking money themselves too. And so that's a very successful prank. But I'm like, man, that's awesome. But then they get dragged into court over it and everything. I'm like, yeah, that's scary. I don't want to be involved in that kind of stuff. So I got some prank ideas where it's like, this would be a lot of fun to do. It'd be really cool, but it can end up with you getting arrested and then having to explain yourself. And the cops at that time, even though I assume most of these, cops are people too. Most of them probably find these pranks pretty damn funny. But when they're on duty, they got to pretend like, hey, this isn't funny because, we're being called out for it and everything. But I have seen pranks where there are cops and they react. And you get some cops where they react and they're like, hey, that's not funny at all. And then other ones are like, hey, that is funny. And it's like, yeah, that's a good way to measure too. Typically, if a cop says it's not funny, it probably is.
So I don't want to ruin a long-term prank right now, but you know what you should do? You should sell these two guys some fake hats, and then in 3 years when they don't produce, you can be like, gotcha, bitch.
Gotcha.
Some fake what?
Fake hats.
Oh, that's not a prank. Oh, I know a big breeder that's responsible for many of those pranks. So I guess
we don't use those names on here, though. Positivity.
Yeah. Yeah, no, those are not fun pranks. So I've been on the other end of those. Yeah, those aren't fun pranks. I was like, hey, there goes $4,000 that took me 6 months to raise when I was 15 years old. And it took me 7 years to figure out that all those hats and pos hats and buying more hats from the same person putting them together and getting nothing out of them. I'm like, man, that was fun.
That sounds like a great prank.
Yeah, it was.
That's the best prank in the hobby.
It is a good learning experience and pretty solid prank, I guess. Pretty solid prank.
So yeah, I think that this is a great plan. I think having you on as a regular, would be cool. So yeah, I mean, I think we've been going on for a little while here, and 2.5 hours or so, a little less, but I don't know. There should be some closing comments.
Closing comments. Well, thank you guys for having me on, and thanks, Dave, too. Really appreciated all of it, and it'd be cool too to get some maybe insight if anybody's listening, if they have any other questions I didn't cover with Hognose or any concerns like that. Because I'd like to, although this is the podcast, I don't know if you guys ever do follow-ups or anything like that.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
coming off a little desperate, buddy. Firm, maybe.
Yeah. Please have me on again. Nobody else will. I want to be on again.
I've been drinking. All right, what do you want from me?
Yeah, no, I think you covered everything, Hognose. That won't be necessary.
All right. Yeah.
No, we'll have you. If you could change the battery in your smoke detector, maybe we'll have you on. I don't know.
That's
yeah.
Yeah, how much wear your hat next time?
I'm never really over here when I do go. As soon as it's bad timing, but as soon as this is over, I'm going in there and I'm taking the damn battery out.
But then are you going to put one in?
Not right away. The other smoke alarms, they're all that's important. Again, the incubator room is not up and running yet. There's no...
And you'll never guess where it's at.
There's no chance of a fire, Dave, unless somebody commits arson in that one specific area. And I'm going to gamble that nobody's going to launch any fiery assaults on my place in that specific area.
Those are a terrible prank.
It'd be a terrible prank, but it would be one nevertheless.
It would be. All right.
I enjoyed it. I thought that was great. Thank you again, Junior. Honestly, really on here, man. I know there's a lot of conversations we've had before, but I never get bored of listening to you talk. So.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, it's too bad. You guys should have a Tiger King episode. Just get a bunch of people and talk about Tiger King.
Yeah,
we should.
We could, but by the time we do another episode, it might not even be popular anymore.
They're releasing some more episodes this weekend.
One more on Easter, so that's pretty exciting. Actually, I hope it doesn't suck. It could ruin the entire series if it's a bad episode.
That's what I'm hoping they don't do because that was a compilation of 5 years of material and bits and pieces of it. I mean, that they probably only used 20% or 10% of their actual footage.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot more. So it makes sense that they have enough footage saved to go back and they probably had things they left out because they probably didn't think it was going to be as popular. And then they have some probably recent interviews too that they're going to involve. But yeah, hopefully they don't ruin it too much. But I don't think they really can. As long as they're just doing interviews with people, because it kind of is a documentary, even though it might be slightly sensationalized and they might be portraying certain things or just focusing on certain things. I mean, it is just kind of people talking. I mean, aside from anybody say lying, it's all truthful material. And it's interesting because there's a lot of aspects to it. You know, exotic part of an animal industry, and then also, you know, multiple and accusations of murder and possible like hiring for murder. So yeah, there's a little bit for anybody to enjoy in it.
Yeah. Have you guys done the Carol Basket number neighbor thing yet? Where you text your number neighbor asking if they think that Carol Basket did it or not?
We have not.
Yeah, I did it. No, they didn't text me back. Maybe I should have did some small talk first, but yeah, I got no love for my number neighbors.
I've seen the post
with a picture of your face, like,
you know what? When I get wrong numbers, I do that, but not when it's intentional.
That's you know, like, I think if we did one of those episodes, even if you know, it's a little ways down the line, I mean, I saw tigers is timeless. Let's just be honest.
We could probably edit that in here somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, Junior's got the face for it.
Just grow out the Fu Manchu. You're good to go.
Yeah, you Fu Manchu before. Kinda.
I think I'm a little lost as to what's going on.
We're just saying that you look a lot like David Spade.
Oh, okay. Maybe vaguely. We're both white guys that are skinny.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
And that's a perfect place to close.
All right.
All right. Ryan, you want to take us out?
Thank you so much, man, for spending some time with us tonight. It was an awesome conversation.
No stroking egos.
You are the king of Bolin's pythons, and I appreciate your insight.
Oh, yeah.
If you like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below. Any questions you have for this guy, we'll make sure he answers you right quick, especially if you didn't buy from him. He loves it. And, you know, catch us next time, man.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. Dave, you can say the catchphrase and we'll get out of here.
We have a new catchphrase? Is that it? Is that it?
We're waiting to hear it.
We're waiting. We thought you were going to make it up.
On the spot, just like that? You think I'm that good?
Yeah.
I might not have anything. Zing zong, zoobity boo.
I must ask you a question.
Oh, that's like the worst one ever. That's so obvious.
Yeah, it's not a good.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Usually I'm good with this kind of stuff, but you really fucked me over there. Really fucked me over. I got nothing. So yeah, thanks.
That was a bad prank. Sorry.
I'm gonna spend all week working on that catchphrase. Like, yeah, thanks.
We'll have to be more professional, you know, for our next people. You know, that's
preferably.
Yeah.
Preferably.
I apologize.
All right. So thank you so much. And yeah, so we'll see you guys later. And thank you guys for watching.
Peace out, guys.